of the meeting. We have item 5, which is approval of the 2022-23 municipal tariff applications. Members, we have over 110 applications, or 117 to be exact, that we need to go through. I'm going to request Mr. Mavuso to introduce this particular item, or Ndate Sichotlo to do so, and also to lead us in terms of the sequence that we need to follow. But according to the agenda, we should be starting with agenda item number 5 and then proceed to the second batch, that is item number 5, submission 2. Mr. Sichotlo or Mr. Mavuso, if you can just introduce the submission and guide us in terms of how we proceed with each application that we have received. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to mention, Chair, I've been admitted to this meeting as a guest, and then I keep on being cut off. So if I disappear, it may be that problem. But I will give it to Brian to lead us on this one. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mavuso. Your challenge is being noted. That is Chotlo, you can lead us. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the outside stakeholders. Chairperson, these are municipal tariff applications for the financial year starting on the 1st of July 2022 and ending on the 30th of June 2023. And mainly these are submissions that are within the benchmarks, and thus they are coming to this committee. Chairperson, just maybe in terms of the packaging, the way I was looking at it, just to avoid the confusion for members, I think the way that we should treat it is to look at submission 2A, the cover, and then to look at submission, sorry, not to submit item 5, submission 2A, which is cover, and then item 5, submission 2, annexure, batch 1 to 36, and item 5, submission 2, annexures 37 to 83. In that way, Chair, I think it will help us. But in terms of sequencing, Maria will guide us when we get to that point. Chair,
Brian, sorry to interject. I think
yes,
in the board pad, in the board pad, the sequence, it's not the way you have just outlined it. We have item 5 in the board pad, which is the submission cover, including the first 34 applications, and the others relate to the 83 applications. So maybe Ms. Hutting as well, if members do get a bit lost, I will ask Ms. Hutting to really assist. But proceed in terms of what you have outlined, Brian. So I was just assisting members that item 5 is the one that actually has the submission cover, and as well as the 34 applications that I think we will be starting with. You may proceed, sir.
Okay, no, Chairperson, that should not be a major challenge. I will correct that. However, as I said, Maria will lead the members in terms of which one we're doing at whatever time. But also, I'm going to also ask my colleagues to refer to page numbers when they make presentations so that members are not lost. Yeah, Chairperson, and then the next part is really for us to look at the delegation matrix. And the delegation matrix is on page 2 of the cover submission. And you can see that item 2.4.1 and 2.4.2, these are the submissions that we'll be looking at this meeting, which are those that are within guidelines and benchmarks, and those that are within guidelines but above benchmarks. And obviously, for those that are above benchmarks, my colleagues will give supporting motivation why these are maybe proposed for approval, or maybe these are not are proposed for rejection. And then, Chair, I think we had a meeting with the FTRM, and one of the things we discussed was really the confusion that we always get when you get to these meetings regarding the benchmarks. And I just wanted to talk on that point. There are two kinds of benchmarks, Chairperson. The one is the one that we refer to as financial and technical benchmarks. These are as close as possible to international benchmarks because some time ago, I think they were based on some studies and they're very comparable to what is happening internationally. For instance, system losses, we know they range between 10 and 12%. So these are very much of what we can confidently call benchmarks. But obviously, they also need to be updated to be as relevant as they are today internationally. But the one that is difficult and the one that always makes confusion is the one that we refer to as the tariff benchmarks. I think, Chairperson, maybe the word benchmark in that regard, it's a misrepresentation. It's clearly not a benchmark because a benchmark is really that you say the best in class, and I want of everybody to then be benchmarked against that the best in class. However, the way that these benchmarks are within our environment is that these are ranges and based more on the averaging, grouping of tariff classes and similar municipalities, and therefore they are not purely benchmarks. What we are busy with as a division, and specifically as the Electricity Pricing and Tariffs Department, we are busy overhauling the entire tariff methodology, including not just the municipalities, but also ESCOM. This is obviously dependent also on the review of the EPP, but also it's also dependent on the cost of supply studies that we receive. Those will then help us to get some kind of database, but also there is a project within the division, that of collection of as much data as possible. And I think this was not only in the ELR strat plan, but it was also raised many times in the REC strat plan, which is still to go to the ER. But it's really a serious matter that we have realized that we do not have sufficient data as an organization. And therefore, we've got a project to just collect as much data as possible so that when we talk about benchmarks, they are really based on data and our decisions are really based on clear data and not just this. But maybe today, if for lack of a better word, it's more of a range, whereby within a particular tariff category, you'll have a range saying a tariff that goes between 105 cents per kilowatt hours to 110 kilowatt per hours will be within the benchmarks. It's just that it is comparable to the other municipalities within that category and within that tariff category. It's not a clear benchmark. So I know that it's not part of this discussion for today, but I've realized over the years that every time that we talk about this, it brings this kind of challenge, and members seem to believe, or we make members to believe that we are really dealing with pure benchmarks while we are clearly dealing with averaged ranges within a particular tariff categories for comparable municipalities. Chairperson, the other part I wanted to confirm, and I think members are aware of this, the guideline that we're talking to today is a guideline of 7.7%, 7.47%, and the details of the calculation as approved by the board. It's on page 7, but I think it's a matter already done. It's a sunk decision. The guideline itself is 7.47. Should members see anything that goes beyond that, and we have not done anything, members can question, and then we can provide answers to that. Chairperson, before maybe we get to the details of the individual tariffs, as I said, it will be from 1 to 36 and 37 to 83. I would like to maybe invite Ms. Mataku and Mr. Advocate Morati, more specifically Advocate Morati, because there is an ongoing challenge on how municipal tariffs are being handled. And we just thought that maybe we should give some kind of confidence to members that you are still within your mandate to approve these tariffs, even though this is still a matter that is still sitting with the court. But obviously, I know that as the matter is with the court, we cannot give all the details because we are still arguing our case in court. So I'll ask Mr. Advocate Morathi to do that. But then after that, Ms. Matak will then come in and guide us as to the individual tariff application, which one comes first, and then we'll go through those one by one, taking questions from members as we usually do. Thanks, Chair. Advocate Morathi and Ms. Matak, if you can just please assist on that one.
Good morning, Chairperson. Good morning, members and fellow colleagues. Madam Chair, mine will not be really that much of an issue because, as Brian has touched to great extent on the issues that we have submitted, were filed in courts as our line of argument. But in principle, the point of argument that has been raised and that has been labored on to a great extent is the issue of what authority do we have to approve the tariffs in a format that they are. Secondly, the issue that anything that is outside what the Municipal Fiscal Powers and Functions Act defines as the tariff of a municipality, anything that is outside of that, NERSA then is approving a surcharge. And we have been clear in our court papers to highlight that at no given stage has NERSA ventured into the approval of the surcharge, because that falls within the domains of the Minister of Finance to determine the norms and standards. And then the councils of the municipalities are the ones that can deal with that particular aspect. And they would need to reflect on what is it that the surcharge is intended to satisfy over and above what has been approved by a regulatory authority that has been defined in the Municipal Finance Management Act. Secondly, the issue that those surcharges, they are so broad that they don't relate to the licensing component. They relate to services that are being rendered within a municipal space, whether by a municipality itself or by any other person. The second critical part is about what powers do we have to deal with municipal tariffs in the format that we're doing. We have impressed in court to highlight that the provisions of Section 15 of the ERA is anchored on the license condition, to say the license condition that we have issued to a licensee, in this instance municipalities, that it enables us to approve the tariffs using a guideline that is established in the licenses of municipalities. But over and above that, the Section 35 of the Electricity Regulation Act empowers us to issue guidelines for the best administration of the mandate that we have and the ERA. And in that regard, the guideline has been developed not as a law, not as a rule or regulation, but to enable the best administration in a uniform way to all the municipalities, so that we do not have outliers in the space where we would not be achieving rationality in the process. So those became our submissions, and the matter has gone to court, and the parties have been requested to find a settlement on the issues. If there's a failure to reach a settlement, then the matter will be orally argued in court on the 24th of June. So I think, Chairperson, there's comfort that we have submitted to court in terms of what we have been doing for the past many years. has not resulted in irrationality. It hasn't resulted in overcharging in terms of what we are expected to be carrying out as the objects of the ERA. And that those line of arguments, one would say, they have found favor with the judge, hence the insistence on that the parties should go out and try and settle the matter so that there's no chaos within the country. Madam Chair, I will pause there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moratti. I don't know if Ms. Matlaku wants to come in as well. That is true to ask you to just come in terms of introducing the submissions. Are you ready to do that?
Yes, Chairperson, thank you. Good morning, Chairperson and regulator members, as well as colleagues. Chair, yes, the sequence that will be following in terms of presenting the actual tariff analysis, we are going to be starting with the document on that was distributed, the document named item 5 submission 1. That is the submission that has 34 applications in it. And then from then we'll move on to item 5, submission 2. Chair, we have, as it was requested by members previously, we have packaged the applications per province. So we will be starting with Western Cape Province. This is on page 16 of 42 of that submission 1. And the first one will be Breede Valley Municipality.
Okay. Kaku, sorry to interject. I just missed to ask members if they have any questions to ask Mr. Advocate Moratti or Mr. Sichoko in terms of their introduction that they have made. Members, do you have any issues or questions for them? I see Mr. Mkiza's hand is up. Mr. Mkiza, you may come in, sir. And Mr.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks to Mr. Stoffel and Advocate Moratti. I would just like to state that I would have appreciated an all-encompassing introduction so that we don't have to repeat certain things as we go along. For example, we know that afterwards we need to write letters to these municipalities where there's an issue of maintenance to bring maintenance, repairs and maintenance within what we deem as the benchmark, so to say, or the range within which it should fall. Also noting that there was a report that then was done after the conclusion of the approvals last year. We need to have that in place, and to put this whole thing in context, because we're actually having a lot of moving parts in as far as pricing, tariffs and pricing in the electricity industry is concerned. And therefore, they need to paint that picture very clear in this document under 5. You know, for example, if you look at 10.8, it talks of the night safe tariff and restructuring and rationalization of Eskom's tariffs. But it's not giving enough in terms of what actually, what are the main milestones that we're seeking and by when are they expected? You know, for me, there are a lot of the pricing, there's a program, and within this program, there are a lot of projects that they must then be able to highlight. And then we avoid having to ask certain questions now when each and every one of these municipalities are presented. So that is just my appeal in terms of the write-up and the introduction, so that things are seen in the context, and it's not us not actually exercising due care in terms of asking specific questions for each and every municipality, because we understand the overall picture. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Mr. Komede?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning to you and Mr. Mkhize and management. Chair, I just thought I would perhaps guide a little bit, having we have indeed engaged as a team, and just get clarity, maybe to clarify certain things. For instance, the first clarity that I thought I would give is based on the delegation matrix. I'm sure Mr. Mkhize may be concerned as well that there are a number of tariff increases that are above guidelines. That I think, let's just be clear, maybe have an upfront agreement that because the REC delegation matrix is limited to within guideline increases, that even if we wanted to consider above guideline increases, we cannot, because that would be in breach of our delegation. And therefore, as the team presents, we must highlight those ones that are above guidelines, and to indicate that we will definitely limit, we will be forced, well, maybe even offer an overall approach in terms of how we deal with that, because as the REC, we are not mandated to deal with anything that is above which is above guidelines. Yes, we can deal with above benchmarks in terms of the matrix, but we cannot deal with anything that is above guidelines. So the question is, how do we deal with that? So that is the first issue. There are a number of them it's not too many, but there are those. And in fact, there's one municipality, it seems to basically have a number of them that are above. And the question also would be, does 7.48, which is higher than 7.47, for instance, would that qualify as above guideline? And therefore limit, how do we deal with that? So we need to be upfront on that. That's number one. I also thought I would correct something. There is a statement under paragraph 5. It's paragraph 5. So I don't know, the statement is about the actual delays. I think it's about the delays that are linked to the court judgment that we had last year in December in respect of Eskom tariffs. I think it is unfair for us to communicate a message in this document that says it's only this year that we were not able to finalize the municipal guidelines on time to allow the municipalities, in terms of the MFMA, to conclude their tariffs by the 15th of March. As far as I know, at least in terms of my recent history of this, we have never managed to do this. Even last year, we tried to actually approve Eskom ERSA tariffs before the 15th of March, but we traditionally missed this deadline. I think I don't think it's a fair representation. That paragraph 5.4, and I just thought I'd put that on record. So that's the one other thing that I thought we would. And then under issues raised, I was hoping that Mr. Sichodlo would talk a little bit more. Yes, he's spoken about the benchmarks, but there were other issues that the members of the REC had raised last year. Maybe just to highlight a little bit, so we don't actually get repeat questions from last year, to indicate what are the issues that were raised last year. And they are captured, some of them are captured under page 6, but it would be useful to just highlight a few, to say what are the issues that were raised last year that were not addressed, and perhaps even provide reasons why that is the case. For instance, the one issue has always been, for me, in misrepresentation of what is called the average selling price, which would assume it's a weighted average of all of those tariffs based on the amount that's sold at that particular tariff, when in fact the average selling price is in respect of what is being produced, at least for most of the municipalities, it's the average realized price, that is the total revenue divided by whatever that was sold, which may exclude, which is affected by losses, but that can be confirmed. And therefore, so that when we deal with these definitional issues or with these submissions, we are clear what each of those things actually mean. It really would be very, very useful, and I would really request Mr. Chotho also to just again talk a little bit about the power cost. The power, sorry, that get the term now. I think it's a power factor, whatever that factor is. I just forgot the term now. But it would be useful to address the issues that were raised last year, to indicate, well, especially those ones that we could not address, and explain the reasons why. If it's a data that is not available for municipality, just so that we are pretty clear, we don't repeat the same questions that we actually asked last year. The other comment I wanted to raise was in respect of the current framework that we are using. I think for me, it's important to note that even when we are talking about cost of supply studies, it was really, our framework has been to support the changes to the tariff structure. That for me, this framework has not always been about ensuring that the tariffs themselves are cost reflective. That is, for each of the municipality, that it's driven on a cost reflectivity. So, for instance, even the public hearing that we may have had recently, the public hearings we may have had recently in terms of the ELS, has been really about justifying the costs of a particular municipality, whether those costs are actually truly electricity-driven costs in terms of the business. And also in respect of, I guess what I'm saying is that in terms of cost reflectivity, that's what the current project is trying to do, to correct that it becomes quite clear that the consumer prices, the tariffs as we call them here, the consumer prices, are reflective of the cost to serve them. But the cost of supply studies have traditionally been about when something, if there's a change in the tariff structure, somebody comes and applies. But in fact, what we've been doing is been increasing, assuming that the actual tariffs, as long as there's no change in the tariff structure, assuming that the tariffs themselves were originally based on that they are cost reflective, and therefore it's just been a percentage increase from last year. And that's important to actually talk to, so that I think we need to locate this cost of supply study properly. At this stage, I don't think it is properly located. I did want to comment on the same page, on page 11, that when we talk about benchmarks, for instance, we've got revenue collection rate, a target is 95. And therefore the energy losses should also be, be less than 5 in terms of the target. I was intrigued when I was in Ghana, where they've got, and not just the target, the actual collection rate is 99.7%. Now, this is an African country; it's not in the EU. That it is possible. I mean, that's a very good target. And the question that it raises, for instance, is that should we make the people who are paying to be penalized for people that are not paying? So if we so we increase the tariffs because we've got people that are not paying. Is that fair? So I just thought I'd actually raise that. Then on page 15 on page 15, I had a comment that says it would be useful for Maria maybe from Ms. Matlaku, who's doing the overall, so that we send a strong message out there to be useful to make a comment on which municipalities are best performing and which municipalities are worst performing. We are indeed approving these tariffs, but clearly there are some municipalities that are doing a lot better. It's just a question is going to be the matrix in terms of what defines a good performing municipality, and to indicate the worst performing ones. I think we owe it to the public out there to actually to acknowledge and not just seem like we are actually rubber stamping something. So I just thought it may be useful that I'm talking about just tariffs, especially even on issues of collection rate or whatever. It would be useful, and maybe there may even be some commentary, Mr. Sichotlo, on why those that are performing well are seen to be performing well. If it's an issue of those municipalities that are 95% based on residential consumers, for instance, that issue may well come across. It may be a useful issue to actually talk to. Chairperson, those are the issues that I thought I would actually raise. Thanks.
Thank you very much, members. Your input is really valuable, and I hope the team have noted the input that you have made. I think from my side, I just had one comment as well, which is on page 11. I think those performance indicators, when one reads the submission, you also want to, or rather, what comes into mind is what were their indicators in the previous year? Are they the same? And how are we really stretching the performance that we want the municipality to be at in terms of their electricity businesses? So that would have been really helpful for us to be able to see if we are we are increasing or stretching the indicators each year in terms of the performance expected from the municipalities. And table 2 seems to be indicating the now that we are going to be taking into account in assessing these particular tariffs. I don't know that this shortly whether you want to come in, or should we just proceed to Ms. Matlaku? But I think members have made valuable input. And some are for the enhancements of these the main submission and the process that we are currently following. Before that, I see Mr. Mkiza's hand is up. Mr. Mkiza, your hand is up, or is it a lingering hand? If not, maybe let me just allow Mr. Ndates Chotho to come in if you have any comments. So that
no, Chairperson, it was a lingering hand, but let me just try to also maybe assist in terms of moving with speed. Mr. Chotho, just look at them. Just want you to reflect on the possibility of just when the approvals have been done, to then have a submission extracting key aspects. For example, talking to the issue that Mr. Kumete raised around the performance of these municipalities. Which one was the highest, lowest? What are the reasons that you think are coming out of that? And also the projects that you are doing, putting that context, because now it might be a bit difficult with the time constraints that you have, but to have that summarized and provided to this committee, which will also include what would have been done with regard to those that are above guidelines. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Mkiza. And this truth, I think you may have heard last week, the Auditor General gave an indication of how municipalities are performing, but it was just an overall performance in terms of all services that they are being provided. And I think the guidance provided by Mr. Kumete to say that maybe we should also have an indication of best performing and those that are not performing in relation to the electricity business that they are expected to provide as a service, which we do regulate as the energy regulator. Dr. Chotlo, is there any comment you want to raise or points so that when we move to Ms. Matlakuli,
Yeah,
then get
yeah.
into the actual tariffs. Please.
Sure, Chairperson. I think yes, we take issues raised by members, and we look at them. Some of them, especially the one about best performers and worst performers, we take it that obviously that would mean that we do a kind of a study, not a very big study, but just to group municipalities and say what are the criteria for doing that. I don't think that we can do it in this meeting, but we can maybe probably, because normally after this process, the month of July and probably part of August is ready to clean up. So maybe in August, September, we can bring that report to members as to the best performers and the lower performers, and the reasons and what can be done if possible in terms of assisting those. I think in the past, some few years back, we did do that kind of report. I remember we used a word like ICU, so municipalities in ICU, but then we decided to get rid of that word because it was not seen to be a proper word to use. But we can do such a report. That is, but not for this particular meeting. But I think, Chairperson, maybe let me start with issues that were raised in the previous cycles, because that would answer a lot of questions that members are raising today. We have included that table, and unfortunately, Chair, maybe because of time, I did not go through the entire table to show for each and every issue that was raised. I did not comment on that, but I can just give highlights. If you look under paragraph 6, that is the table I'm referring to. And the first one is that we need to overhaul the municipal tariff benchmarks. I think I did mention that that part is also dependent on the new pricing methodology and the EPP. And then the issue of the next one is on the issue of the repairs and maintenance. And I think Mr. Mkhize has raised that. Chairperson, we've got a challenge with this particular one. And the biggest challenge is really about us obtaining accurate asset registers, which would really even tell you the age of assets and the condition of those assets. And that is why, and again, we want to stress the issue of cost of supply is not about the tariffing only, but also about the main management of the municipalities, especially their assets. You cannot manage that which you cannot measure. And that is why we're always saying cost of supply, cost of supply, cost of supply. Unfortunately, this is one area where we're struggling with municipalities. But the leader of that project, Dr. Bongani Konjolwai, has said to me that it was very slow at the beginning, but we are seeing a kind of very slow, but still the appetite increasing. We're seeing them coming in and we're dealing with them. And maybe that will help us in going forward. The other issue that was raised was the split between energy losses between technical and non-technical. Unfortunately, municipalities just record what they've purchased and what they've sold. As to what cost the difference between purchases and sales, they are not able to do that. And we are trying to also assist them. And again, it goes again. Unfortunately, I'll have to mention again the cost of supply study, because that will allow municipalities to know that my system, because of its the health of the system, the technical losses will be at this level, and then the remainder will then be your commercial or non-technical losses. That is also a work in progress, and we are also working. There's a team within NERSA that is dealing with the non-financial information, which again will assist us once they get these reports, because the deforms are more financial and not non-financial. But the non-financial team can maybe assist us in determining that split between technical and non-technical. We've been requested again to include geographical maps. That we have achieved. We've done that. And then we've packaged municipalities per province as requested. The ring fencing, Chair, this has been an age-old one, the matter of ring fencing. unfortunately, that is a very difficult one without even reading what is written in the commentary. In that, when council is sitting, they are sitting as council, looking at the water services, they are looking at the switch services, they are looking at rates and taxes. They are not looking at a separate entity as the electricity department. To an extent that the electricity department, cannot on its own, for instance, go and source funding for them to be able to do some infrastructure improvements. It has to go via the council or the municipality as a whole. To an extent also that even the money that is made within the electricity business sometimes get lost into supporting the other services. So this has been one of the age-old ones, age-old problems that we are dealing with. And I don't want to say each and every one. We are working also with on the non-compliance. We are working with ELC, also in collaboration with COGTA and SALGA to assist us in getting more compliance with the municipalities. The issue of rationalization and restructuring of tariffs, I think this one, Chairperson, goes with the issue of night safe. I think 2-3 years ago, Eskom did submit to NERSA a tariff rationalization plan. And because at that time, the cost of supply that Eskom was using was seen to be an old one. We said we cannot be looking at that without a revised cost of supply study. We needed to have a cost of supply study, and then we put that on hold. And we said we'll look at that once at least that cost of supply has been completed. And we have revived that process with Eskom to discuss the way forward with regard to the rationalization of those of municipal tariffs. Our sense, Chairperson, there is appetite from Eskom to get some rationalization. Once only we can get the issue of the cost of supply studies out of the way, but also once from our side, we've also provided sufficient guidance in terms of the way forward with regard to the overhauling of the municipal tariffs. Then obviously we believe that they did submit something. Unfortunately, it was not based on a cost of supply study. Mr. Gumede did raise an issue about the delays with regard to MFMA being blamed on the court proceedings. I think that was not an intention of the team to say that it is only because of that and it's only happening this year. Probably it's only that the language that we are using may be misleading, and we can just revise that to say that even over the years we've had that. But the main one for this year, in fact, it was more delayed because of the court judgment. But it is true that this thing has always been an issue. And I think the biggest issue, and we've raised it before, Chairperson, to say that there is a serious misalignment in terms of the various legislation. The way that municipalities do their budgeting, and the way that MFMA expects NERSA to then take into account the municipal budgeting processes, those are totally misaligned. And therefore, we have actually, even in the letters that we have sent to the Minister of Finance for that exemption, that matter has always been raised to say that it makes our lives a bit difficult for us to do that. And Chairperson, the other matters I'd really would like for us to really get into the tariffs, get the tariffs approved, and then from there we'll come back with a report, a detailed report as to how other matters have been handled. And I'm going to also plead with my colleagues. My understanding, Chairperson, the guideline increase is an overall increase and not an increase on individual tariffs. But colleagues, and maybe Maria can come in, it's not an individual tariff increase, but the overall increase that the municipality is looking for. Because you can have an increase of, say, 8%, an increase of 7%, but on average, the increase is 7.47. So that would be within the guideline, in my understanding. But Maria can then talk to that. But also the colleagues can come in and explain that even better. And the last point I wanted to talk to about is the one that you are raising about the performance indicators, whether these are the same as last year. When we presented the guideline, Chairperson, we looked at the performance indicators from previous years, and we then revised them at the level of guideline. But we have not done that at the level of municipalities, except where when we do the actual tariff analysis, we find that there has been an improvement or a decline in system losses. Then we'll then talk to that particular municipalities. But at the level of developing the guideline, we have actually looked at the performance indicators from previous years. Chairperson, I think with that, and I'm going to also request that the issues that have been raised, we have actually recorded those, and we'll take them into consideration going forward, and we'll provide a report. As I said, I think if the indulgence is given, we can give that in September, because July and August, we know that we are dealing with the cleaning up and making sure that everything has been implemented in accordance with what has been approved, and also ensuring that we publish, we do our tariff booklets and communicate everything as supposed to be. But for now, Chair, I think if you may allow, if Maria can then take us with the team on the individual submissions. But again, with the request from my own members, from my own colleagues, to really highlight those issues that need the attention of members, for the members to be able to make proper decisions on those particular municipalities. I thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you for this chapter. Thank you, members. I think now we really need to move, but I think the discussion and the input given by members and the responses that we have been given are available for us to keep in mind throughout this particular process. We are looking forward to a post-assessment report that the Sichotlo, once we have dealt with these applications, as we have said, around September. So we will be expecting that. On that note, members, I would like to hand over now to Ms. Matlaku. Apologies for having interrupted you, Ms. Matlaku. I had to give members an opportunity to also comment on the presentation given by Dr. Sichotlo and Mr. Advocate Morati earlier on. So you may proceed. And I think, as Mr. Gumede indicated as well, that we will appreciate it if you can highlight those tariffs that are above guidelines and those that are within, because as indicated, we do not have a mandate to deal with tariffs that are above the guidelines in terms of our mandate contained in the REC delegation matrix. So please, as you proceed with the team, please let them highlight those that are above those particular guidelines. Over to you. Mr. Mkizo, your hand is still up.
Yes, Chairperson, just one thing, really, as I don't intend to delay further. Just to say that there is a statement that talks to non-compliance from municipalities with electricity distribution licenses. Then it just says, in collaboration with the ELC, the department is looking at these matters, and non-compliant municipalities will be reported to provincial and national treasury, as well as COGTA, Exalca. I'm saying, let's just be very clear as to what our ERA says and what are we doing with respect to that, beside reporting them. I think that would be important and must be clearly outlined in the report that will then be tabled before this committee in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sichotlo. I think that request is very clear to say that we also have a role to play on non-compliant municipalities. What is it that we do and other than to say we'll refer these to COPTA and SAGA. So keep that in mind and look at our governing legislation in terms of the provisions made on non-compliance, as well as the licenses that we have issues. What do they say? Because we do have a role to play as a regulator. Ms. Matlako, over to you.
Thank you, dear Chairperson. In terms of the actual tariff analysis and presentation of those, we'll be doing those per province. We will start with the document that's labeled Item 5, Submission 1. That document has 34 applications in it, and then we'll move on to the document that says Submission 2. There's 2 of those, 1 to 36 and one that says 37 to an extra 37 to 38. Chair, we will start with Western Cape Province. This is on page 16 of page 420. And the first one that we'll be looking at is Breede Valley, and this will be presented by Kulani. Chair, we'll be following the sequence of tariff applications is on page 14 of that same document that ends with page 420. So the first presentation that we'll have is for Breede Valley Municipality, and that will be presented by Kulani Matumbu. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Over to you, Kulani.
Thank you, Chair. If we look at Breede Valley, it is situated in the Western Cape, and its financial and technical indicators, it's looking very good. Breede Valley has a percentage surplus which is within the NERSA benchmarks at 12.72%, and energy losses that are also within the benchmarks at 7.05%. All the tariffs are increasing in line with the guideline, and they are within the benchmarks and some below the benchmarks. We therefore recommend for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Kulani. Members, any comments or input on this particular application? By show of hands, members, can I get an indication that you do support the approval of this tariff? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, Mr. Gumede, and I do support as well. Can we move on to the next one, which will be by Ms. Buiswa Mabinya?
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm going to be presenting Karoo Hoogland. I just want to indicate upfront, Chairperson, that in terms of page 14 of 420 of the submission, Karoo Hoogland has been written under Western Cape, but it's actually a municipality situated in the Northern Cape. And they are applying for a 4.80 average tariff increase, which is below the guideline. The financial health of the municipality's electricity business is satisfactory, as indicated by a surplus of 23.18 and energy losses that are within the benchmarks. Most tariffs are above the benchmarks, but they are all increasing by 4.80, which is below the guideline. And we therefore recommend for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions, issues of clarity? If there's none, by show of hands, in terms of approval. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I also support. The next one, Kulani, as well, you may come in.
Thank you, Chair. Overstrand is based in the Western Cape, and the municipality is has a percentage surplus which is slightly below the benchmarks at 9.46, and the municipality indicated that the surplus which is below the benchmarks is due to them incurring a departmental charge of 57 million, and the energy losses are within the NERSA benchmarks at 7.35. All the tariffs are increasing in line with the guideline, and they are within the benchmarks, and some are below the benchmarks. So we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you, members. Any issue? If there's none, by show of hands, can I get an indication that you support the approval of this tariff for overstrand? Thank you, Mr. Gumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. And the next application, Kulani, I think it's still yours again.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Swartland is also situated in the Western Cape, and it has a percentage surplus of 15.63% and energy losses of 5.37%. And the tariffs are the tariffs which are increasing, which are above the benchmarks, are increasing by below the guideline, and most of the tariffs are within the benchmarks, and some are below, and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, by show of hands, Mr. Gumede, is a question or a vote?
Chairperson, it's a question. I think it's one of those where I think let's get a position on this. There is one tariff there on page 10 of 12 at tariff 13 on normal park, which is increasing higher than 7.47. I think let's get a principled decision in terms of how we deal with those. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Gumede. That is Shuttle Maria. Can you just make a proposal on how we should deal with this? Or Mr. Gumede,
yes.
Get decision now before we proceed, because there may be others. I suggest that we take a position now. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, I think that for me, Chairperson, it's proper so that we don't repeat the same. If we take a position that we take all of them to ELS, then we don't even have to discuss them. We just take them to ELS. If we decide that they are discussed here, we can do that. Chairperson, the guideline, when we develop the guideline, we develop the guideline on average tariff basis. We did not develop the guideline on individual tariffs. And therefore, there may be tariffs that are increasing above the guideline, and then those that are increasing below the guideline. But on average, the tariff increase is actually at the guideline or lower the guideline. That has been how we treated these tariffs, and that's why they are coming to the REC. It's not on the individual tariffs themselves. That is how it has been done historically. So you may find that there might be one that is increasing above the guideline, but when you do the overall average increase, the average increase is within the guideline or below the guideline, and therefore it comes to the REC. I don't know, Maria, if you want to add, but that is how it has been done. And maybe Thabo, because he's also here and he's the champion behind the guideline, he may also add on that, so that we finalize this and then we go to the other tariffs. We know that we can deal with them or we don't deal with them. I think it's proper that Mr. Gumede raises it here, and we avoid to then deal with it on an individual basis.
Okay, Maria, do you want to come in?
No, I think I'm covered by what Mr. Shoto has said, Chair. That is what the delegation metrics say, that they are delegated to REC. Thank you.
Yes, but the question was, if within a municipal, if within the tariffs that are applied for, I think the question is that if there is one set or two sets of tariffs that are above the guideline, should we be dealing with them here or not? But Brian is also trying to explain, to say that when you average all the tariffs, if they are within the guidelines, and that's how you are presenting them to us. Maybe let me just ask Mr. Gumede to guide us in terms of what we should do, or whether the response Mr. Sichotla has given us, is he satisfied with it or not? Because I think what has been explained, it's what has been followed in the past. But if there's a need for us to review that, I think we should do so. Mr. Gumede?
Thanks, Chairperson. I think for me, the challenge is firstly in terms of our mandate. I mean, we should not be seen, say, for instance, the other one coming, the other tariff coming immediately after on page 11 of 12. it's 7.79 as well. So the question is, would we be in breach? And I think perhaps that's where the RSU guidance would be valuable. That because for those people that are experiencing that tariff, for them it's not an average issue. It's that we are being charged a particular tariff, and that particular tariff, the increase is above the guideline. So there's 7.47 for everybody else, but we're getting 7.79 increase. Now, all I'm asking here is, I think in terms of RSU, would we, as the REC, have the mandate? Are we properly delegated to deal with this? And if the view is that for anything that is above guideline, it needs to go on a public hearing, and there has not been a public hearing sought or applied for by any of those people applying for those things. The question is, why don't we just limit the increase to 7.47 so that at least we keep within, except if we feel that we cannot, are we then seen as applying for the applicants? But my guidance would honestly be, let's keep within our mandate and let's not approve anything that is above. I think that's how we even dealt with them last year as well. Because even this idea of an average, the question that you then ask, then you say, when you say on average it's below, it is below guideline. Is it a weighted average? How did you decide that? In that particular case, that analysis should have then been included here to indicate that on average, and it must be indicated how that average was actually calculated, estimated, I guess, in terms of the amount that is sold at a particular tariff, which is a weighted average. I don't know, but it is not clear here. For me, I would really honestly guide that we don't actually give ourselves as the REC powers that have not been delegated to us by the energy regulator. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, so meaning that if I understand your input is that the guideline of 7.47% should be per tariff and not overall tariffs that an applicant has applied for. If I think I get you, Mr. Komete, that's what you're saying. Let me, Mr. Mkiza, I see your hand. I don't know whether you want to come in first before I just ask RSU and legal to assist us in terms of how we proceed with these tariffs within an applicant's applications where their tariffs are higher than the guideline, and take into account the explanation that Mr. Sichotlo had made. Mr. Mkiza, you may come in, and then I think Dr. Morati and Chokwe, please, if you can come immediately after Mr. Mkiza. Mr. Mkiza?
Thanks, Chairperson. And I understand what Mr. Komete is highlighting. I would appreciate if RSU can then give guidance. Firstly, looking at the issue of taking the overall increase vis-a-vis looking at the individual tariffs. And also, in the case of the individual tariffs, whether it's, especially looking at the economy and everything right now, whether just to make the increase more than the guideline, just to be within the benchmark, is sufficient reason. Because here there are no other reasons other than just to say we want to fall within the benchmark. The very benchmark that was highlighted as not having been updated as such, just to consider that portion, so that if that is really the only reason given, maybe after the review of those benchmarks, one may then be able to consider that. What if the review throws them below in future? I'm just concerned, just an increase to say I want to fall within the benchmark. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. RSU, Mr. Ntanzi or Sichotlo, says Chokwe, please come in and provide guidance. Ms. Hatting, I don't see them on my screen. I don't know. Can you assist me if you see them?
Chair, both Mr. Moratti and Mr. Chokwe is in a meeting at the moment.
Okay, can you ask Mr. Chokwe to assist the meeting?
I will contact them, Chairperson.
Okay, Mr. Moratti, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think my comment would be premised on a concern, and that the consideration of treating the guideline and the benchmark as tried, as exposed us in many respects with regard to the fact that they are not law and they do not carry the status as I highlighted earlier on, that it's neither a rule. And having said that, they have been used for efficient administration of the municipal tariffs. And in the instance that now we start treating them that an application that has been brought which exceeds the guideline or outside of the benchmark, my guidance would be that it needs to be treated as it is. And it need the REC needs to take a decision on that application for reasons that would have been advanced without correcting or changing such an application, because any such exercise would be one what to call, if it was a court, that we will be addressing the issue from the bar, which then exposes us to judicial review to say our decision it's not based on an application that was before us. We actually amended the application. So my guidance is that that application needs to be treated as such. Secondly, the issue that Mr. Gumede has raised to say, do we have to look, maybe I might modify it do we have to look at individual tariffs? Madam Chair, we have been taken to court. We're still in court to date for having one tariff in the broader tariffs of a municipality, having been increased above, and the customers in that particular category highlighted that therefore the assertions that it is within the benchmark or the guideline, it is not correct, because the tariff in that category has gone much higher, and the matter is the Madiweng matter involving 14 foundries. So I think our approach, we need to generate consistency in terms of highlighting this issue without necessarily modifying applications, and where they are not talking to the principles that we have been trying to pursue, then the decision should be made as such based on what is before the REC. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. Brian?
Yeah, Chairperson, having listened to the two members and Advocate Moratti, there is a proposal, Chairperson. I think maybe that proposal can assist us, which is a proposal again that was put on the table last year and we used it. I think Mr. Gumede said maybe the safest that we can go is to say where we have such incidents where a tariff is a particular tariff, not the entire tariff, tariff, average tariff is above guideline. Where particular tariff, say commercial, is above the guideline, we simply limit it to the guideline. And the reason is that it is above the guideline, and therefore we limit it to the guideline of 7.47. I think if we can treat all of them like that, there will be consistency and there will be reason. And the reason being that it is above the guideline, and we want to maintain that the tariffs cannot be seen others being unfairly increasing above the others when others are increasing at a lower rate. I think that for me probably would be the safest to go. And if we can take it and not make any exceptions on this batch that we are having in the coming batches. All the batches is that if it's above the guideline, we limit to guideline. unless those that have gone through the public hearings. I would rather maybe we do it that way. And that would also save us in terms of buying time and being consistent, Chairperson. I think that for me would be much safer, Chairperson. But obviously, there could be comebacks from municipalities. We'll have to deal with those. But I think for now, we can actually make that decision.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Sichotlo. Members, do we agree to proceed in that particular manner, that any tariff within the applicant's tariffs that are higher than the benchmark, we do not approve it, we limit it to the 7.47%. There is a hand that is up. I can't see whose hand is it. Lelaine, if you can assist, or can that person just come in, because it's not Mr. Kumeda and it's not Mr.
It's Mr. Chokwe, Chairperson.
Oh, okay. All right. Chokwe, you may come in.
Madam Chairperson, good morning, and good morning to members and colleagues. I apologized. I just got a call from the line. I missed it. I was not actually listening properly. I must admit, but I heard that the CEO wanted something that I should clarify. I don't know what is that what that was, and I would want to clarify, Chairperson, if I can be given an opportunity. But I missed it, Chairperson. But I'm here in the meeting.
I think the issue that was raised was that RSU should provide guidance, because in some of the tariffs that we have, we've got applicants that have applied for a type of tariff that is above the guideline. For example, the current application that we are dealing with, which is SWART land. And in terms of that, they do have a tariff that is above the 7.47. It's on P10, and the other one, it's 7.79. So the question was, in terms of the delegation metrics to REC, we have been delegated certain powers. And if there is a guideline that says that this is the guideline that you need to use to approve municipal tariff applications, can we approve tariff applications within an applicant's class of tariffs that is above the guideline? So that was the question. I hope I'm paraphrasing it well, Mr. Gumeta. So we were seeking guidance from RSU to say, RSU, can we then, as RSC, approve these tariffs that are above guidelines? Because it may appear as if we are approving something that is not within our powers, because the guidelines have been approved by the ER for us to use in approving these municipal tariff applications. So if you can just come in there, I hope I've clarified or paraphrased well what was raised by Mr. Kumeda. Thanks.
Thanks, Madam Chairperson. I will depend on Murati and the team. I would just actually indicate that the delegation metrics that we have is that any tariffs that will be within the guideline actually will reside here, but anything above guideline, even within benchmarks and above benchmarks, they belong to actually electricity. I'm saying here, I mean REC, but Murati and actually Dennis actually was the one who actually helped when we were doing this at the earlier stages to understand them, how they work. We were just actually taking the instructions from them to say it has to be clear from the team to say if it's within guideline and benchmarks, whether it's clear from the application, I'm not so sure. That is actually done by REC. But if it's above guideline, even if it's within benchmarks, that would be approved by the ELs. I'm becoming too simplistic, Chairperson, but I think the colleagues who actually understand the dynamics are the ones that help us actually couch this delegation matrix to actually actually make sense to them, rather than actually us. We actually just to try to carry them out to say it has to make sense to you guys so that when they get implemented, we can actually go with it. Thanks, Chairperson. I'm not being helping that much. I'm just indicating that from where we are sitting, they look very clear on our eyes, in the sense that if it's above guideline but within benchmarks, it's ELS. If it's above guideline and above benchmarks, it's ELS. But if it's within guidelines and benchmarks, it's REC, and it's within guidelines and above benchmarks, but it will still be REC. Let me stop here, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mkhize?
Chairperson, I'm not assisted here because my understanding is that if the average increase is within guideline, then it's dealt with here. If above, it's dealt with elsewhere. But the issue is then to then say, if first of all, let's just get that one very clear, if that is what is the case, and maybe talk to the averaging, if that averaging is proper and acceptable. That is number one. Then two is the issue of the individual categories of tariffs now. If those individuals, if one of that category is above the guideline, then what? That is the clarity that must be provided. Then the last thing and the third one is to say that how then should that be dealt with? Was I was saying myself in the beginning that if I look at the merits of the case, then I was proposing that the merits of the case should still be looked at individually. But for me to simply say that you are increasing so that you can fall within benchmark, for me is not sufficient, especially under these economic conditions. I will leave it at that, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mkhize. There is another hand. I can't see whose hand is it that is up. Ms. Hatting, if you can assist me. But I think really, members and colleagues, I think we are really running out of time now, and we've got a lot to go through. Mr. Chotla, can you just explain in terms of what Mr. Mkhize is also seeking clarity on, to say that the issue of averaging, if a tariff that was within average, are we saying should be dealt with by the REC? If it's above, should be dealt with elsewhere. And I think, Choke, you can also come in terms of that particular question to say that if the average of an average tariff application of an applicant is within the guidelines, it should be dealt with here. And if it's above, it's dealt elsewhere. So the issue of averaging seems to not to be clear to members. If we can just be assisted in terms of that. And the second part is that, which we discussed earlier on, that if within the tariff categories of an applicant, there are those categories that are above the guidelines, and should they be dealt with here or not? But I thought Brian had provided guidance on that to say that we should not consider them, we should limit them to the guideline percentage. Brian, that's please just come in.
Yeah, Chair, there was a hand that was given. That was from Thabo Chabalala, who's the guy that does the mechanism of the guideline. And then maybe if he can put his input. But mine was really saying that when we do that, it will be based on the total cost, and that comes to the average. Maybe Thabo can explain that.
Okay, before Thabo comes in, then let me allow Mr. Gumede to come in. Mr. Gumede, colleagues.
Thank you, Chairperson. May I honestly, as you've rightly indicated, we are running out of time. For me, from where it is clear, and even from the issue that's been raised by Mr. Murati, although we may say on average for a particular municipality the increase is below benchmark, but for that category of customers who are experiencing an above guideline increase, they can take us to court, and they have taken us to court. Therefore, that's the one part. And therefore, if it's not justified by way of a public hearing, like in terms of the public hearings we had last week or the other week, in respect of those above guideline increases that were sought, that we cannot. So for me, from also what I'm then seeing is that because it's also outside of the mandate of the REC, honestly, I really just request that we move on this and agree that we, like we did last year, we limit the increase to guideline. And if a municipality feels aggrieved and it needs to actually then follow the right process, which is seek a public hearing, and actually that matter then is dealt with by the REC. So that's going to be my request, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. And maybe let's just make a decision on this. Thabo, I'm not sure if you still want to come in. I want us to really move because this meeting, it's not going to end before we finalize all these tariff applications today. Do you want to come in, please? If you do,
Chair, I think maybe because what Thabo is going to be talking about is the average mechanism, but what Mr. Kumede is proposing is really about just saying, let us limit it to guideline. Can we just, for the sake of the meeting and progress, can we just make a decision on that one?
Okay, all right. No, thank you. We'll proceed on that note. So the decision, members, by show of hands, can I get an indication that you do support that decision to say any category of a tariff within a municipal application that is above guideline will be limited to the 7.47 that has been approved, which is within the mandate of this particular committee. By show of hand, members. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support that position. Mr. Mkiza, I don't see your hand. So in light of...
Chairperson, I support, but I think the statement must be properly crafted to indicate that we are not we're limited to the guideline from the point of view that it has not gone through the public process for that particular category. And it's going to be also important that the licensees, the municipalities, are properly advised with regard to this, so that they don't take it like they can take away from Peter, so that they can give more to Paul. That should be very clear, because the licensee in lodging the application must be aware of also how we go about dealing with it. Because the issue of delegation for me is neither here nor there, because at the end of the day, the licensee is going to get a decision coming from NERSA as an entity. And I think that is of importance. So I support it, but I'm saying let's properly craft it so it is understood and it helps us going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kumete. Yes, Mr. Mkize, any category of tariff that is above guidelines will be limited to the guideline of 7.47, unless if the applicant takes those tariffs that are above the guideline through the public hearing processes. And secondly, the consideration of those that are above the guideline are not within the mandate of this particular committee. On that note, members, can we then proceed and with this particular application from Swartland tariff? There are two tariffs that are above that particular guideline, and it's on, I think it's tariff number 13. Kulani, if you can assist me, number 13, that is at 6.65%, and number 14 on the time of use, which is at 7.79. So members, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. On that note, then, members, do we approve the other 12 tariffs, which are within the guidelines for this particular, or rather, we approve the tariffs, and then the 13 and 14 are going to be limited to the 7.47. On that note, members, by show of hands, can I get an indication that you support that approval? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Mr. Mkiza, I don't see you. Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. So, Kulani, that is the approval for Swartland. We then move on to our tariff application from the Free State Province. We're going to start with St. Lake Mangaung. Tate Chabalala, you may take us through this particular application.
Thank you and good morning, Chair. I will be presenting Mangao Municipality, which is situated in the Free State Province. This municipality has no issues since we can see that their losses are within the benchmarks at 10%, while their spending on repairs and maintenance of 11% is actually exceeding the target of 6%. The municipality is applying for a guideline increase of 7.47%, and the tariffs are within the benchmarks with the exception of the elect flex tariffs, which have been limited to inflation to allow for convergence towards benchmarks. With that being said, the tariffs are recommended for approval in line with Table 7 of the analysis sheet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just for confirmation, there is no tariff that is above the guideline in this particular application, right? Just to confirm for us.
So the application is within the guideline. It's at 7.47%, but the tariff itself is above the benchmarks. Hence, they've been limited to inflation. Thank you, Chair. Just one particular tariff called elect flex.
Chair, let me explain that is not a problem in terms of the delegation, because the delegation talks about the guideline. If it's above the benchmarks, we can still bring it here and then we can make a decision on that one according to the matrix. So that one is fine. We can actually make a decision on that one as RSC. It does not have those issues of being above the guideline. If it's above the benchmark, it's still within the mandate of the RSC according to matrix. Yes. But Chair, also maybe I'm sorry to do this to you, Chairperson. I should have mentioned this when we were dealing with the previous one, because these tariffs are based on the average of a basic charge and energy charge. Can I request that obviously then the team, when adjusting the tariffs, can look at what is the best place where they can adjust, and then they can bring it here after approval, then just for confirmation that there's been adjusted. So you are not guiding us as to whether or not we should reduce the energy charge or the basic charge, but that the average tariff must be within the benchmarks. It's just a confirmation of that, because I'm receiving emails and WhatsApps from colleagues about that. So it's just to confirm that, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, do you have any issue with that proposal to say that those that are above, we are limiting them to the guideline? However, the team will go and work out in terms of where the adjustment is going to be made and bring that adjustment to be within that 7.47, and for us to note. I see Mr. Gumete supports that, and I do support that. Mr. Sichotlo, you can bring those tariffs that we have limited to the guideline and indicate to us where the adjustment has been made. Thank you. Members, in terms of Centelec, by show of hand, can I get an indication that we support the tariff application? Thank you, Mr. Gumete. I do. Mr. Mkiza, thank you. Can we move on to the next one, Mafube, Ms. Masike? Colleagues, we are going to have to move with speed, please. Ms. Masike.
Thank you, Chair. Good day to you all. Mafube municipality is situated in Free State. The financial health of the municipality is satisfactory, as indicated by the surplus and the energy losses that are within the benchmarks. The collection rate for the municipality is 95%. The municipality is currently proposing the average increase of 7.47% for the 2023 financial year. The tariffs are within the benchmarks, and where there are no benchmarks, the municipality, the specific tariff categories have been converted to similar tariffs. It is recommended that all the proposed increases be approved as applied for, and the recommendation is on page 119. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Masike, members, by show of hand, can we approve this tariff? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumete. Can we proceed to the next one? Manchopa, Aleta Tanda is taking us through.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Mantsopa municipality is situated in Free State. They are proposing an average tariff increase of 7.47%. All tariffs are within the benchmark. The financial performance of the electricity department is improving, as evident by a decrease in the deficit and a decrease in energy loss. The tariff have been recommended as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any issues? If there's none, can we then please get an indication by show of hand whether you approve the tariff or not? Ms. Masike, if you can mute yourself, please. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you. I support as well. Mr. Mkize, I take it you do support as well. Thank you. The next one is yours then, Ms. Masike. No, it's a letter again.
A letter, yes.
Siphoto.
Siphoto is situated in Free State, is proposing an average tariff of 7.47%. All tariffs are within the benchmark. The tariff has been recommended as proposed.
Okay. Members, any issues on this tariff application? If there's none, by show of hands, can I get an indication that you support the tariff as presented or as recommended? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mkiza, Mr. Kumete, and I do support. Then we move on to the next one, which is Tukuluho. Ms. Masike?
Thank you, Chair. Tukuluho is based in the Free State Province. The municipality is applying for the 7.47 guideline increase, and the tariffs, except for domestic, the tariffs are generally below the benchmarks. It is recommended that the tariffs be approved as applied for. The ASP APP ratio is below the NESA norm. So the municipality will be asked to submit a cost of supply study in order to correct the situation. But yeah, we are recommending that the tariffs be applied as approved for this year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any questions or issues of clarity? If not, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations? Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I also support.
You mute, Chair.
Oh, thank you. The Tukuluho tariff is approved as tariff application is approved as presented. We are now moving to KwaZulu-Natal province. We'll start with Alfred Duma and presenter Khumani. Ms. Matlaku, can you just come in when your team members are delaying so that we don't waste any more time? I don't know. It says here it's Khumani Mandla. Khumani Mandla, who's the presenter. So please, can you take us through that one?
Chair, I'll request Ntabiseng to take us through on this one. She works with Khumani if he's not available.
Okay, Ntabiseng. Colleagues, time is really against us. Please be ready with all your tariff application. You know yourselves, and the list has been provided with the names of the presenters. That's how I'm picking them up. So please just come in or be ready as soon as you know you are next. Please. Maria, I do not see Ntabiseng and as well as Khumani. I don't know if there is.
Can we pass and then I'll deal with it on the side? It's a bit of an embarrassment from our side. Sorry about that.
Okay, can we then proceed to Emma Langeni, Rodney Khare? Please come in. Endumeni Rodney again. I don't see him. We'll then move on to the Greater Kokstad. Ntabiseng.
Thank you, Chairperson, and my apologies because I had to go through those two because I haven't looked at them, but I'll go through my Greater Kokstad. The Munich is applying for average price of 7.47. In terms of the financial and technical indicators, the electricity business is within the Munich's performance satisfactory. The tariff are within the ranges. Chairperson, the recommendation is on page 200.
In terms of the tariff, all of them are within the guidelines, right? Unless if I've missed any of them. And if they are, by show of hands, members, can I get an indication that we approve the Kokstad tariff application? Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. And then we will move on to the next one, Inkosi Langalibalele. Shumani.
Yes,
yes. Coming, Kumani. Can we then move on to the? I think the next three are Kumani.
Am I still not audible?
Now we can. Colleagues, can we try and mute ourselves, please? Kumani. Yes. Try again.
Yes, Chair, I'm here. I actually connected on the phone. My laptop is not working.
All right, we can hear you. Can you start with all of your tariff applications, starting with Alfred Duma, and then we'll proceed to Inkosi Langalibalele, Thala Isitebe, and Thala Matate. If you can deal with in that order, start with Alfred Duma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Alfred Duma is based in the KZN area, and the municipality is applying for a 7.47 increase, and all the tariff increases are within the benchmark. Them are outside the benchmark. Thank you very much, Chair. It's been Alfred Duma. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, members. Any issues? If there are none, by show of hand, can we approve the tariff as recommended? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Also support. Then take us through. Yes.
Chair, sorry, it's Rodney. I also had issues with connection, but I'm back. Can I present Ematlangeni and Ndumeni, please?
Okay, proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. My apology. Ematlangeni is based in KZN. All tariffs are increasing by the guideline. The main issue here is the losses that are mainly caused by theft. Thank you.
Any issues? If not, by show of hands, can I get an indication of your approval of this tariff as recommended? I do support. Mr. Kumete, thank you. Mr. Keys, I don't see him anymore. I think the hand is his. Thank you. The tariff has been approved. You may proceed to Ndumeni, Rodney.
Thank you, Chair. Ndumeni is based in KZN. All tariffs applied are increasing by the guideline increase. The issue here is the losses that are caused by illegal connection. Thank you.
Okay, members, any questions, issues of clarity? By show of hands, can I get an indication that you support the approval? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Kize. Can we then move on to Shumani again, which is Inkosi Langalibalele?
Thank you very much, Chair. For Nkosi Langalibalele, it is recommended by the analyst that all the tariffs be increased by 7.47, which is in line with guideline increase. But as you will see in the analysis, some of them were applied for the municipality and they seem to be above the guideline increase, but it's mainly due to rounding off mainly on energy charges, sorry. So it is recommended that all tariffs be increased at 7.47. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Members, by show of hands, in terms of supporting the recommendation. I do support. Thank you, members. And the tariff is approved. Rodney, if you can move on to the next one, Itala Isitebe.
All right, thank you, Chair. So Itala Isitebe is a private distributor, and these ones, their increases are based on their cost to serve. So since it was indicated that those that are not at guideline increase will not serve here, I don't know if it's worthy to discuss it, but it is applying for a 9.61 increase, which is in line with the ESCOM increase to supplying them the amount at which they buy at from ESCOM. Thank you very much, Chair.
I think the tariff applied is above the guideline. Members, I think this is one of those tariffs that I believe we shouldn't be considering as REC. Any issues on that, Mr. Gumede?
Chairperson, thank you. I was going to raise that also. There's another one under SAPI, where the issue here is, are those tariffs, I think we do need to make a principal decision on this one. Are those tariffs that are actually linked to the ESCOM Megaflex and not necessarily, and perhaps even though, and it's mainly tariffs, it's mainly issues that are dealt with by bilateral agreement between ESCOM or between the municipality and the thing. I do believe that we need to make a principal decision on those ones, whether, because they will invariably, if they're linked to the increase in terms of Megaflex, they'll invariably be higher than the guideline. So the question is, do we actually tackle them here or do we move them somewhere else? So, but my recommendation, Chairperson, is that because they are higher than the guidelines, can they be tackled by ELS, please? Thanks.
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion. Mr. Commander, I see Brian's hand is up. Brian?
No, Chair, I don't mind taking it to ELS. The only reason, I just want to make it to make it clear to members, the only reason that this came to this platform, and we will move it to ELS. We are not against that. It's because these are private distributors, and the guideline is based on municipalities. But because we've got an ELS that is scheduled, we can take it there so that we don't really waste time in terms of arguing about whether they should be here or not. So we'll take it to the ELS, but it was only because these are private distributors to which they, if you look at it, we do a cost to serve kind of spreadsheet for these private distributors. It's not based on the 7.47 per se, but on us calculating the actual cost. But it does not make a difference for us to take it to ELS. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. That's agreed. Members, that's the resolution that this tariff will be taken through to REC. Any objection, Mr. Gumeda? So you support that? I do. Mr. Mkize? You support. Thank you, sir. We then move on to the next one, which is Mandeni. It's Rodney.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mandeni is based in KZN province. All tariffs are increasing by the guideline increase.
Okay. Members, any issues? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you are approving the tariff? I do support. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. And yeah, thank you. Can we then move on to the next one, which is Matatiele?
Thank you, Chair. Matatiele is based in Eastern Cape. The losses and
we can't hear you.
Am I audible? Sorry. Matatiele is based in Eastern Cape, applying the guideline increase. The losses and surplus are within the benchmarks. Thank you.
Thank you. It's in Eastern Cape, but it's put under KZN. Members, any questions or issues in terms of the application? By show of hands, can I get an indication that you support the tariff? I do support. Thank you, members. Can we then move on to Mtonjaneni.
Thank you, Chairperson. Umtonjaneni is applying for 7.47. In terms of the financial and technical indicators, the electricity business within the Munich's performance is satisfactory. The tariff are within the ranges. Chairperson, the recommendation is on page 262. Thank you.
Okay. Members, any questions, issues with this application? If there's none, can I get an indication by a show of hand that you support the approval or the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Gumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. Newcastle.
Thank you very much, Chair. Newcastle is also applying for guideline increase, and all tariffs are within guideline. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Khumani. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hands, can I get an indication of your approval of the recommendations? I do support. Thank you, Mr. Gumete and Mr. Mkize. Can we move on to Nkandla?
Thank you, Chairperson. Sorry, thank you, Chairperson. Nkandla is applying for average price increase of 7.47. The financial and technical performance of the electricity business within the Munich is not satisfactory, as highlighted by the deficit and the energy losses. Chairperson, the issue here on this Munich is the interest incurred on the outstanding debt. However, the Munich is paying only the capital. They are in communication with ESCOM regarding the interest, Chairperson. In terms of the tariff, the tariffs are within the ranges, Chairperson. Recommendation is on page 297. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabiseng. Members, any issues on this application? If there's none, can I get an indication by show of hand of your support of the recommendations? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Mr. Gumete, I do support. We then move on to Sasolburg area. Tabiseng again.
Thank you, Chairperson. These two Sasols are going to be taken to ELS. They are private distributors. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will pass Sasol and also Sasol Synfuels. These are private distributors. And then we move on to Umlalazi. Rodney.
Speak. Thank you, Chair. Umlalazi is based in KZN. Majority of tariff are increasing by the guideline increase, except one tariff that is increasing by 5%. The municipality indicated that the reason for a lower than their guideline is because they are trying to protect the poor of the poorest on this particular tariff, but the rest are increasing by the guideline increase. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there's none, can I get an indication by show of hand that you support the approval? Thank you, Mr. Gumete. I do support. And thank you, Mr. Mkize. We move on to Umvoti and Rodney again.
Thank you, Chairperson. Umvoti is based in KZN province. All tariff are increasing by the guideline, and we are asking for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hand, do we support the recommendations? I do. Thank you, Mr. Gumete and Mr. Mkize. And the tariff is approved. Then we go to Upongolo.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, colleagues. Upongolo is based in KZN. The municipality is applying for an average price increase of 7.47%. In terms of the financial and technical indicators, the electricity business within the municipality performance is satisfactory. The tariffs are within the benchmarks. The recommendations are on page 345. It is recommended that the tariffs be recommended as applied. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Any issues, members, that you want to raise on this one? If there's none, it's by show of hand. Can I get an indication that you approve the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Mkize, Mr. Gumete, and I do support. We then move on to Limpopo province, starting with Phalaborwa.
Good morning, Chairperson, members, and NASA colleagues. Papalabura is based in Limpopo province. Their performance is not satisfactory at all, as indicated by energy losses and the deficit. However, on the tariff side, all the tariffs are increasing by guideline increase of 7.47%, and all the tariffs are within the benchmark. We therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, recommendation paragraph 9. By show of hand, if there are no issues, can I get an indication that you support the approval? I do. Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Thank you, Mr. Kumede. We then move on to Bilabila.
Bilabila is also based in Limpopo province. The electricity department is their financial performance is deteriorating, as indicated by the energy losses that are increasing and the profitability that are declining. However, the tariffs are increasing by the guideline increase, and we therefore recommend for the tariff to be approved and also to request the municipality to submit a smart energy loss report. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, recommendations, paragraph 9. If there are any issues, indicate them. If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. I don't see Mr. Mkiza's hand. We will then, thank you, Mr. Mkiza. We'll then move on to Greater Letaba. Again, Mujadefo.
Greater Letaba is also located in Limpopo province. When we look at their performance is improving, but however, when we check their financial information, it is clear from the analysis that they are over reliant on the consultant. However, their tariffs are increasing by the guideline of 7.47, and all tariffs are within the benchmarks. We therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations, which are in paragraph 9? Thank you, Mr. Gumete, Mr. Mkize, and I do support. We then move on to Musina.
Musina is also Musina municipality is also in Limpopo province. Their financial and technical performance are sorry about that. They are financially sustainable, and they are applying for a guideline increase of 7.47, and all the tariffs are within the benchmark. We therefore recommend for approval. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there's none, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations that are on paragraph 9? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. We then move on to the Eastern Province. We have Ingoba Yetemba. Ms. Leburu.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ingoba Yetemba is situated in the Eastern Cape Province. The electricity business is not improving, as reflected by the deficit level that has declined and the energy losses that are increasing. The municipalities' tariffs are all increasing within the ranges, as well as in line with the guideline increase, with an exception of the domestic prepaid tariff that has been limited to increase within the benchmark. We therefore recommend for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. That domestic tariff is the one for 14.59 increase.
Oh, no, that one was an error. That is increasing by 7.47%. The domestic one is is increasing below the guideline increase. 6.40, yes.
Okay, and then there is this one. You're saying the 14.59, it's 14.59 on P8 of the tariff application. It's incorrect.
Yes, that is supposed to be 7.47%.
Okay, please correct that. Members, by show of hand, are subject to that correction? Can I get an indication if you have any issues? If none, can you indicate?
Just apologies, I did not hear it clearly. So the 14.59 is actually 7.47.
Yes, I think the presenter says it's an error.
It's a typo. Thank you.
Yes, it's a typo. Thank you.
Okay. All right. By show of hand, members, can I get an indication that you support? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. We support the application with that correction that needs to be made under the tariff of 7.2.4. And then we move on to Mpumalanga, Dr. Pixley Kasime. Tabo.
Thank you, Chair. Pixley Kasime is situated in Mpumalanga, as mentioned. This municipality has no issues, as can be seen by their losses, which are within benchmarks at 11%, while the spending on repairs and maintenance is on 7%, which is exceeding the target of 6%. The municipality is applying for a guideline increase, and all the tariffs are within the benchmarks. These have been recommended as proposed, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? By show of hand, if there's none, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations in paragraph 9? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I don't know. My members keep disappearing. I don't know what's happening with the screen. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede, and I do support. Can we then move on to Victor Kanye? Tabo?
Thank you, Chair. Similarly to Dr. Pixley Kasime, Victor Kanye is also in Mpumalanga. The energy losses are also within benchmarks at 9.8%, while even though their spending on repairs and maintenance is slightly below the target of 6%. The municipality is applying for a guideline increase, and all the tariffs are within benchmarks. These have been recommended as proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues of clarity or enhancements? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations as presented on P8 of the application? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. And then we now are moving on to Northern Cape. Siyanuma Tabo.
Thank you, Chair. Although this municipality's losses have increased from 21 to 22%, they have submitted a comprehensive report on how these losses will be dealt with. But at the heart of the problem is the accuracy of their billing system. The municipality is applying for a guideline increase, and the tariffs are within benchmarks. The tariffs are recommended for approval in line with Table 7 of the submission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there's none, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. We are now going to move to the second batch of our tariff applications, which is item 5, submission 2. We will then proceed with the list. Ms. Matlaku, just help me. The first application while I'm still going through my papers. Okay, I do. We have AECI Modderfontein, Gauteng Province. I think it says Ms. Lindobutle Mkize.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning. AECI is a private distributor situated in Gauteng, and AECI is applying within the benchmark, which is 7.47. The surplus is 1%, but it is okay because the private distributor just want to break even. These tariffs are within the guideline and within the benchmark, so we recommend them for approval as above. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, any issues with the application that you may have? If there's none, can we go to recommendations, paragraph 9? By show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the tariffs as presented? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. We move on to the second application, which is City of Tshwane. Ms. Nkopo.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, Chairperson and members, and also good morning to you, colleagues. City of Tshwane is applying for an increase of 7.47 as approved by the regulator. When looking at the financial indicators, the city has operated at a deficit. The deficit is due to even though the deficit has reduced, the deficit is due to the reduction in the energy losses. The collection rate has improved because there has been also conversion of conventional customers to prepaid, but the number of indigents has increased due to people who have lost their jobs due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And also there's a reduction in the sales volumes due to stagnant purchases from Eskom. customers have been moving away from the grid due to also the poor quality of supply within the city. But the recommendation is that all the tariffs should be approved because they are all increasing by the guideline. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Mr. Mkize, your hand is up.
No, I'm fine. I'm okay, Chairperson. I was just trying to mute you, but that's when I had a problem.
Sorry, apologies for that. Members' recommendations in terms of the application by Tshwane. By show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the application as presented? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. We move on to the next one, which is Lesedi's application.
Good morning, Chairperson and everyone. Lesedi local municipality is in Gauteng province, and two main challenges is the increasing on percentage deficit and as well as the energy losses. However, Lesedi local municipality is applying for the 7.47 benchmark, and all the tariffs are within the benchmark. So we recommend it for approval. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there's none, recommendations are on P36, paragraph 9. By show of hand, can I get an indication that you support them? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. We then move on to the next one, which is this Mohade City. Kangwelani.
Okay, thank you.
Kangwelani, sorry.
Okay, no, thank you. Khala City is applying for an average increase of 7.47, which is within the guideline. And based on the financial indicators, the municipality is doing well, and all the tariffs are within the benchmark. So it is recommended to approve the analysis as per tariff analysis sheet. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, recommendations on P45, paragraph 5. By show of hand, if there are no issues, can I get an indication that you support the tariff as recommended? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. Lidlani, help me. I don't see Mr. Gomede's hand. Thank you, Mr. Gomede. Apologies, colleagues. We then move on to the Rand West.
Okay, Rand West is also applying for 7.47. Based on the financial indicators, the municipality is not doing well as their energy losses are above, but the municipality indicated that their losses currently are sitting at 23%, which is below the 32% from 2021 financial year. All the tariffs are increasing within the guideline and are within the benchmark, except for the first block of domestic customers, and that first block was limited to, the increase was limited to 4.4% to protect the domestic customers from high tariffs. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, are there any issues? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation as presented? Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Komete. I do support as well. And then we move on to the next one, which is West Rand Distributors. I'm just trying to get there to see if it's not one of those that should.
No, it's not. It's this one. It's also a private distributor, but it's applying for an average increase of 7.47, which is within the guideline. It only has two tariffs, the commercial and domestic. The domestic one is increasing by the guideline, but it is above the benchmarks. So the tariff has been limited to 4.4% to protect domestic customers from high tariffs. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, Mr. Mkize, your hand is up. Oh, were you voting? Okay. Thank you. If we are voting, Mr. Kumete, I do support as well. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Mr. Mkize, I support. We then move on to the next applications, which are from the Western Cape Province. We'll start with Beg River. Buiso.
Thank you, Chairperson. Beg River is in the Western Cape and it is applying for a 7.47 tariff increase. The surplus is below the NERSA benchmarks, while the energy losses are slightly above the NERSA acceptable range. Most of the proposed tariffs are below and within the benchmarks and are increasing by the 7.47 guideline, and we therefore request for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, recommendations, page 100, paragraph 10, by show of hand. If there are no issues, can I get an indication that you support them? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. We then move on to Bito.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Bito is in the Western Cape. It has a surplus which is slightly below the NERSA benchmarks at 9.59%, and energy losses that are within the benchmarks at 6.75%. When we look at the tariff as applied by the municipality, most of them are within the benchmarks and are increasing in line with the guideline, and the ones which are above the benchmarks are increasing below the guideline. We therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Any issues, members? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations of this application? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Mr. Kumete, I do support. We'll move on to the next application, which is from
Chairperson, with the view though that the 7.59 will then be limited to 7.47.
Oh. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Yes, on this one, we will limit that 7.9 to the 7.47. Thank you for picking that up.
And the same with 7.61, eh?
Sorry? There's 7.59 and
7.61.
And 7.61. Yes, thank you. Page 27 and page 28 of the actual application. They will be at 7.47%. So the approval is subject to that limitation on those two. We then move on to the next application, Cape Agalas. Yeah, let me leave it to you, Buiso, to say it correctly.
Thank you, Chairperson. Cape Agalas is in the Western Cape and they are applying for a 7.47 increase. The financial health of a municipality's electricity business is satisfactory with surplus levels and energy losses that are within the NERSA acceptable range. Most tariffs are below and within the benchmarks, with a few tariffs that are above the benchmarks. But all tariffs are increasing by the 7.47 guideline increase. We therefore request for approval, Chairperson.
Okay. Thank you, members. Any issues? If there are none, can I take you to recommendations page 152, paragraph 9, by show of hands? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I also do support. We then move on to Cederberg. Buiso.
Thank you, Chairperson. Cederberg is also situated in the Western Cape and they are applying for a 7.47 increase. Although the percentage surplus is slightly below the acceptable range, but the performance of the municipality's electricity business is quite stable, with energy losses that are within the acceptable range. Most tariffs are above the benchmarks, but they are all increasing by a 7.47 guideline increase. We therefore request for approval, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, by show of hands, if there is no issue that you want to raise on the application, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Can we then move on to Drakenstein? Khulani?
Thank you, Chair. Drakenstein is also situated in the Western Cape. Its electricity business is doing very well with percentage surplus and energy losses that are within the NERSA benchmarks. The tariffs are all increasing in line with the guideline, and some are slightly below the guideline. And I would like to show the members in page 190 of 534, that tariff special customer Stellenbosch municipality time of use. It's an agreement between Drakenstein and Stellenbosch, where Drakenstein is supplying electricity to one of the Stellenbosch areas, and the municipality is charging Megaflex plus 5% for the first 3 years, and after 3 years it will charge Megaflex tariff plus 10%. So Stellenbosch and is in agreement with the rates, and this tariff is increasing slightly, increasing above the guideline at 8.61. Members can give guidance in terms of that if I should limit it to the guideline. We therefore recommend for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Members, the issue is on 190 with tariff number 20 on special customers between Stellenbosch municipality on the time of use. I don't know, Mr. Gumede, I don't know, there's a hand that's up.
It's mine, Chairperson.
Yes, Brian, please.
Yeah, Chairperson, we had a bit of struggle in terms of this one because of it being a special agreement, and by its nature, it's a kind of an NPA. So the question is whether or not, because if it is a normal customer, then the risk is the one that has already been mentioned of unfair treatment, where you have a higher than guideline increase. On this particular one, we brought it here, but we are saying we are also then prepared, because we cannot limit it to the guideline when they've already agreed. It's something that they've worked on it and have agreed, and maybe we are just saying maybe the fallback would rather be that we take it to the ELS as a special NPA. That would be the fallback. We brought it here just so that members can actually see it. But the fallback for us would be proper that we take it to the, as we do with the NPAs, we take it to the committee that is mandated to deal with the NPAs, which is the ALS.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Members, I was just going to propose that we had made a decision that any tariff will be limited to the guideline, and if it's above, it will be referred to the ELS. Members, do we agree to consider this application, or are all the other tariff for this applicant, with the exception of the one on P190, which will be taken to the ELS as a special pricing agreement between the parties? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. So therefore then, Khulani Drakenstein, all tariffs are approved with the exception of the one on 190, which is tariff number 20, that will be referred to the ELS. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Mkize.
I just want to check with the team if this above guideline increase has got anything to do with Stellenbosch's own application, in view that they are also they've also applied for above guideline and were part of the licensees that were in the public hearing. I just want to check that maybe it is a kind of a back-to-back application, maybe, because if the other might influence, their own application might influence this decision. I just wanted to maybe the team to reflect on that.
Tim, can you assist Mr. Mkize? However, I think this tariff is still going to go to the ELS. Brian?
Could Lani just confirm the issue about the above guideline, please?
And the fact that whether there's a linkage between this and
yes.
and the
That's
one
exactly
that
what
we
I
had
meant.
at the public hearing.
Maybe, Chairperson, in the interest of time, they must just note it for presentation to ELS in terms of how these two are interrelated, so that they don't do the other without having considered the other one. Thank you.
Okay. And what was presented by Stellenbosch in the public hearing. Can we then move on to number 12 under Western Cape, which is Ghanaland? Pumla?
Thank you, Chairperson. I'll be presenting Ghanaland, which is situated in the Western Cape. The municipality's performance financially is not so well, but stable at 5.69% in terms of the surplus level. This is mainly due to an NMD charge that the municipality incurred over the period under review. Their energy losses are contained at 11.36%, which is within NERSA's benchmarks. The municipality's application is overall 7.47%, which is in line with the guideline. And all the tariff categories are increasing within the guideline, even though just a few are above the guideline, but below the benchmarks. And the reason for this is that the municipality have indicated that they want to invest in refurbishing their infrastructure, which is old and outdated at this point in time. And they plan on implementing that plan in the next 2 years. So I recommend that the tariffs be approved as proposed, unless the members have an objection on the few tariffs that are slightly above the benchmark, in which case I take guidance whether I should limit those 2 or 3 within the benchmark levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Pumla. It's not 2 or 3, there are many that are above, not unless if you consider 7.48 not to be above, even though it's just 0.1%. Members, any views on this particular tariff application? My view is that it should go to the ELS as well, because there are those tariffs that are above the guideline. Members, any views?
I think for consistency, sorry, Mr. Kumere, for consistency, we've already made a broad decision in terms of the guideline. Anything that is above the guideline is limited to guideline. Should they want to come back, they can come back, and then we'll provide them with a platform or maybe public hearings. I think for consistency, otherwise we're opening ourselves for others to challenge that decision that we have taken on them. Other maybe we take that decision for consistency and for our own sanity and safety. We just do it that way. With the benchmarks, not a problem, but with the guideline, we've made a decision already. I think, Chair, we should do that and not change for this particular one. Thanks.
9. Thank you, Brian. We'll do that. And I think there are about 9 that are above the guideline. We will take them to 747, unless, we'll take them there as per decision taken earlier on. Mr. Kumede, Mr. Mkize, your hand is up. Are you voting?
I'm supporting what
Okay.
Mrs. Shop is saying, and I'm voting in confirming that.
Okay, thank you so much. So thank you for supporting the proposal, and therefore then the tariffs will be limited to 7.47. Thank you, members. I do support that. Mr. Kumete, thank you. So Pumla, the tariffs there should be limited to 7.47%. Thank you.
I'll adjust accordingly, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we do the same in terms of indication where the adjustments were made, and that will come with the next submission. And then we go on to Kariber. Luisa.
Thank you, Chairperson. Karibek is actually situated in the Northern Cape, not in the Western Cape, Chairperson, and they are applying for a 6.74 tariff increase. The financial performance of the municipality's electricity business is concerning, as it is operating at a deficit and has high energy losses. Most of the tariffs are below the benchmarks, with a few that are within and one that is above. But all tariffs are increasing by a 6.74 percentage, and we therefore request for approval, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think, sorry, I'm just trying to go to the one on page 8. That's the one that will go down to 7.47 instead of 7.53. Members, by show of hand, do we support the recommendation?
Page 8 and page 9, 7.47. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Mr. Mkize, I do support as well. Can we then move on to the next one, which is NAISNA?
Thank you, Chairperson. NAISNA is also situated in the Western Cape. Their overall tariff application increase is within the guideline, which is 7.47%. Their percentage surplus is stable at 10.65%, and their losses are also within the NERSA's benchmarks at 11.3%. There are those categories that are above the guideline, which will be limited to 7.47% as guided earlier. And the recommendation is for approval for the average tariff increase of 7.47. Thank you.
Thank you, members. By show of hand, if there's any issues, if none, can we approve all tariffs within the guideline of 7.47? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Komede. We'll then move on to Lanesbeck. Pumla.
Thank you, Chairperson. Lanesbeck is also situated in the Western Cape province. Their overall application for increase is 7.47% and within the guideline. The municipality's financial performance is not stable. They have been operating on a deficit, but in the period under review have recovered to 1.84%. The main reason for this is that the municipality is buying on the rural flex tariff from Eskom, which is expensive as compared to urban tariffs. The municipality also mentioned that they are engaging Eskom to switching over to an urban tariff in order for their surplus levels to be viable. Their energy losses are contained at 10.16%, and most of their tariffs are increasing in line with the guideline, with the exception of one that will be limited also to 7.47%, and the one that is below, which will be left at that. The recommendation is for approval, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, are there any issues? If there's none, by show of hands, to get an indication that you support the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. And then we move on to the next one, Pumla. It's you again. It's Langebeck.
Thank you, Chairperson. Langeberg is also in the Western Cape. Their applying for an average tariff increase of 7.47% within the guideline. The service department for the municipality in terms of electricity is doing very well, and their energy losses are low at 5%. Some tariff categories are increasing below the guideline, even though most of them are within the guideline. The approval is for, the recommendation is for approval, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, and then those that are above will be limited to the guideline, right? Because there's one or two of them. Thank you. Members, any issue? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication to support the application with those that are above that are going to be adjusted accordingly? Thank you, Mr. Mkize, Mr. Kumete. I do support. We then move on to Prince Albert. Pumla.
Thank you, Chairperson. Prince Albert, also in the Western Cape, they are applying for an average tariff increase of 7.47. The financial performance is steady with a surplus level of 22.51%. Their energy losses are on the high, mainly because of illegal connections and faulty meters. The municipalities have undertaken to impose fines and as well as repair the faulty meters. Most of their tariffs are increasing in line with the guideline or just slightly below, and approval is sought, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Pumla. Members, any issues? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that we support the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Mkize, Mr. Kumete, and I do support.
You're on mute, Chairperson.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Can we then move on to the next one, Saldanha Bay, Buyiswa?
Thank you, Chairperson. Saldanha is situated in the Western Cape, and they are seeking a 7.47 tariff increase. The surplus levels are below the acceptable range, while the energy losses are slightly above. Tariffs are within and some are above, but they are all increasing by 7.47. We request approval, Chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, can we then move on to recommendations? On P286, paragraph 9. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. The application is approved. We then move on to place by Kulani.
Thank you, Chair. Fleecebuy is a private distributor, and it is applying for an average price increase of 3.61, and which is below the ERTA of 9.61 for non-municipal key industry and urban customers. Its aim is to just break even, although it has a percentage surplus of 4.7 and energy losses of 7.50. We therefore recommend for approval.
Okay. Thank you. Members, any issues?
Yeah, mute again, Chair.
I think I'm getting tired a bit. Yes, by show of hand, members, can I get an indication that you support the application from Fleecebuy? Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete, and I do support. Then we move on to another set of application from the Free State. Sentlek, I thought we dealt with Sentlek, Mr. Shabalala. Is it another one?
So Sentlek is divided into two, Chairperson. There's Northern Free State, which is Mangaung. This one is for Southern Free State.
Okay, all right. Thank you. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chair. For for this municipality, we see that the energy losses have increased slightly from 16% to 18%. However, the licensee has submitted a comprehensive report on how to deal with these losses, and we are happy with the measures in place to combat these losses. The municipality is applying for a guideline increase and the tariffs are within benchmarks. I therefore recommend the tariffs be approved in line with the Table 7 of the submission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the tariff applied for? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, Mr. Gumede. I do support as well. And then we move on to the Tlabeng.
Thank you, Chair. The Tlabeng is also based in Free State. The technical performance of the municipality is not that satisfactory as the surplus is below the benchmarks, whilst the energy losses are above the benchmarks. The municipality has indicated that in the report that they will send in September 2022, they will indicate the split between the technical and non-technical losses, but otherwise the tariffs are increasing by 7.47%, which is the guideline and recommended for approval as applied for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Masike. Members, any issues? If there are none, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation of this particular applicant, or the recommendation made for this particular applicant? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. I don't. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. We then move on to the next one, which is the Tlabeng.
Thank you, Chairperson. Tlabeng, it's a municipality in Free State. The only two challenges is the percentage deficit and the energy losses outside the benchmarks. However, all the tariffs are in line with the guideline increase of 7.47%, and then I therefore recommend for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation of this particular municipality? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, Mr. Pumeta. I do support. Can we move on to Motlhaka?
Thanks, Chairperson. Again, Motlhaka municipality is based in Free State. It has reported a deficit of 6.14, and the energy losses below the benchmark of NERSA, and the tariffs are in line with the benchmark increase of 7.47%, and it's also recommended that the tariffs be approved. Thanks.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, can I get an indication by show of hand that you support the recommendations for this municipality? Thank you, Mr. Gumede, Mr. Mkhize, and I do support. Tate Shabalala, may I ask that you mute yourself, please? Oh, you were getting ready for the next one. Okay, can proceed to Nala. Thabo.
Sorry, Chairperson and Thabo. You have Miss Metsimahulu.
Sorry, I beg your pardon then. Sorry, Thabo. Thabo, you'll come with Nala after Metsimahulu. Later, you may proceed. Apologies for that.
Okay, thank you, Chairperson. Metsimahulu from Free State is proposing an average tariff of 7.47. All tariffs are within the benchmark. The financial performance of the electricity department is improving, as evident by the improving surplus. However, the increase in energy loss are the cause of concern. NERSA will closely monitor the energy loss. The tariff has been recommended as proposed. I thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any issues? If there are none, may I request that we consider the recommendations on page 362, paragraph 10, by show of hand. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I do support. And thank you, Mr. Kumete. We then move on to you, Ntate Chabalala. You can proceed with Nala.
Thank you, Chairperson. Nala is also situated in the Free State Province. For this municipality, we find that the energy losses have increased from 12% to 15%, and this is mainly as a result of glitches in its financial systems. The municipality has identified the issues and will be addressing them. This municipality is applying for a guideline increase, and the tariffs have been recommended as proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, if there are any issues, please indicate by show of hand. If there are none, yes, I see Mr. Kumete. Or are you supporting?
Chairperson, I just wanted to ask Thabo on these ones. I've been looking at all of these things in Free State, and the question that keeps coming into my head is the mines. Are they supplied by Eskom or are they supplied by Munix? I'm not seeing the trend emanating here, so I'm not. But I am supportive, Chair, of this particular one. But I keep asking myself the question here: who supplies the mines in the Free State? Is it Eskom or is it municipalities?
Thabo, are you able to assist Mr. Kumete with that?
On that one, Mr. Gumete, normally with other provinces, we find that in areas whereby your big customers, such as your mines, if they are supplied by Eskom, normally we get challenges whereby municipalities are raising these concerns to say that those are the revenue generators and they're being supplied by Eskom. But so far for Free State, we haven't gotten any such queries on that. So we would need to go investigate, but at this point, I cannot confirm nor deny. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, if you can assist with the response in the next submission. And we then move on to Mwate, Thabo, again.
Thank you, Chairperson. This municipality is also in the Free State. We see that the energy losses have increased again from 23 to 28%. This municipality has submitted a report on how these losses will be dealt with. But at the heart of this problem is that the municipality is dealing with the duplication of its vending machine group codes, which then allows criminals to illegally sell electricity. This municipality is applying for a guideline increase, and the tariffs are within benchmarks. These, as a result, have been recommended as proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If there are none, can I get an indication by show of hand that we support the recommendations as contained in 412, paragraph 9? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, and I do support. We do then move on to the next one. Nketwana. Zwanga.
Thank you, Chairperson. Nketwana municipality is also situated in Free State. The municipality is doing well. It recorded a surplus of 18.8%, and the losses are within the benchmarks. They're at 8.51, and all the tariffs are are increasing according to the NERSA's guideline of 7.47%, and I recommend for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support this, the recommendation to approve this municipality's application? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Can we then move on to Northwest, Greater Taung?
Thank you. Greater Taung is applying for an average increase of 7.47, and all the tariffs are within the benchmarks. So it's recommended for approval as per analysis sheet. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you approve this particular application from Greater Taung? Thank you, Mr. Kumete, Mr. Mkhize, and I do support. Members, we do have 5 minutes left before the end of our meeting, but I'm going to request members that we try as much as we can to deal with all these applications, and we will then consider our agenda in terms of the metals that are agent. Members, with your permission, do you agree to give me some time that we go through these applications and finish them off today? Thank you.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. I do support as well. Thanks. On that note, colleagues, again, please, let's move quickly. Let's not then capitalize on the fact that we've gotten an agreement to push up until the end, but let's move quickly. We then go to JB Max, Kangweleni. Apologies if I pronounced your name wrong.
Okay, JB Max is also applying for an average increase of 7.47. The tariffs are within the benchmark except the domestic tariff first block, and then also tariff DLV, and then tariff DMV and their NGOs. And all these tariffs that are above the benchmarks are limited, have been limited to the inflation increase of 4.4%. And then also I'd like to make a correction. There was a typo error on the commercial tariff B. Energy charge is 194.26, but the correct one is 208.77. That 194 is for last year. So I recommend that tariff be approved as per analysis sheet. Thank you.
Members, any issues with the application? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation subject to that correction that has been highlighted? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I also support. Can we then move on to Khetleng?
Thank you, Chair. Khetleng River is situated in the Northwest Province and is applying for guideline increase of 7.47. The municipality's performance is not satisfactory as indicated by high energy loss and deficit. We therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues with this particular application? If there's none, can I get an indication by show of hand that you support the approval of Khetleng's application? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, and I do support. We then move on to Mamusa. Jacqueline?
Mamusa again is situated in the Northwest Province and is also applying for guideline increase of 7.47. The municipality also performance is not satisfactory as indicated by higher energy loss and deficit. We therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues with this application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that the application as presented is approved? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. I don't see Mr. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Then can we move on to Makwasi Hills?
Yeah.
Kangweleni.
Yeah, Makwasi Hills is also applying for an average increase of 7.47, and their tariffs are within or below the benchmarks. The tariffs, the municipality is not increasing all the basic charges of all the customers. That's why most of the tariffs are increasing below, and then I recommend for approval for all the tariffs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, members. Any issues? If there's none, can I get an indication by show of hand that you support the recommendations for the application by Makwasi Hills? Thank you, Mr. Gumede, Mr. Mkhize. I do support. We then move on to Matlosana. Dr. Konjelwayo.
Yes, good day. Matlosana is applying for an average increase of 7.47%. They have high energy losses, and they also have a high deficit. So all their tariffs are increasing by the guideline, and most of them are within benchmarks. We limited one commercial tariff because it was above the benchmarks. We recommend the approval of the tariffs. The recommendation is on page 498. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, members. By show of hand, if you have no issues, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations from this applicant? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. We then move on to Naledi.
Naledi is also applying for an average increase of 7.47, and all the tariffs are within the benchmark except one, which is the three-phase, and the tariff has been limited to 4.4 increase. And then also, I'd like to make a correction on the time of use medium. The recommended is blank. There's no basic charge there, and then the basic charge is 2762.25 as proposed. And then I'll recommend for approval on this of the tariffs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the approval with the insertion of those figures that are missing under the time of use tariff, which is tariff number 610 on page 510. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. We then move on to Ramotsehere Muilwa.
Okay, Ramatare is also applying for the guideline increase of 7.47%, and the energy losses are also decreasing, and then all the tariffs are within the benchmark. So the recommendation is to approve all the tariffs as the recommendation said. Thank you.
Thank you, members. If there are no issues, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the tariff application from Ramotsehere Muilwa? I do support it. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. Can see Mr. Mkhize's hand. On that note, thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Can we move on to the next one, which is Zwaying?
Zwaying is also applying for 7.47% increase. The municipality is not doing well. Their energy losses are increasing, but the municipality indicated that they have measures in place to try and keep the high energy losses. And then all the tariffs are within the benchmarks. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope there is a plan as well in line with the others on the energy losses. Thank you, Mr. Kumede. If there's no issues, I do support as well, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you. We then move on.
Chairperson, I did want to comment on this. I don't know what we do as the energy regulator, because it seems like an irresponsible behavior to increase prices when we've got losses of 42%. That clearly the focus should question is whether, is it something that we as the energy regulator can even say anything about? Because clearly here the problem is not price increases, but rather just collection. At 42% losses, Chair, I don't know, but I'm just not sure what kind of guidance as the members that we need to offer to this. There are a few of them like this. There's one which is sitting at 50% losses. 51% losses.
Yes, I think it's a good point. But my understanding is that when there are losses, system losses, we request municipality to bring in a plan as to how they are going to deal with those losses, and we monitor it. So I am not sure from the team side whether that's what they do as well. Because if you look at paragraph 8.2 on 534, it said that the municipality must send a progress report in line with it. So I don't know. Brian, do you want to respond to Mr. Gumede's point that he has picked up? And it's not only on this one, and there are other Munics that have high system losses.
Yeah, Chair, I think the point that Dr. Gumede is making is very valid. You cannot fill up a bucket that has got holes and you try to fill up the water in that bucket. It will always just be losing that water. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that, Chairperson, when we get these reports are not something that we can actually put our hands on unless, and sometimes it's also a matter of the quality of the information that has been supplied. I think there must just be maybe something that we put as NERSA, as a study on the system losses themselves. There is no way that you can, even by us giving them 7.47% increase, there is no way that they can sustain a business that is losing more than 40% of the sales that they are purchasing. It's just something that is not business-wise, economic-wise, it does not work. But I think, unfortunately, when we do this, the time does not allow us for doing that. For now, if we can maybe try and see if we can get maybe external assistance for us to do. And I know that GIZ tried to do the same in terms of studying what causes these system losses and how municipalities that are having these very high system losses are managing to succeed over the years. Because 7.47, when you have a system loss of more than 40-something%, there is no way that your business can survive. That's just a financial truth about it. So I don't have the answer for now, but it's something that maybe as we bring that report that we promised to bring, maybe it's something that we can have a page in that report to deal with that. And I really sympathize and understand what Mr. Kumeri is saying about that. It just doesn't make sense at all.
Which is the report coming in September. So in terms of the action item, please add this into your list in that submission, or rather pack it as well as an action item that needs to come around September in terms of how can we deal or even assist municipalities with this particular issue of high system losses. I see there is a hand. I don't know. Again, is it Mr. Mkize? There's a hand that's up. Brian, was it your hand?
No, it wasn't. But I was also going to say, Chairperson, that in the report of September, please let us be clear that we are not bringing a solution, but we are saying what we are going to be proposing in terms of how we must deal with it going forward. So the report will highlight what are the issues, and maybe also list those municipalities that we see that consistently their system losses are high, and maybe we can propose what is the action going forward. But it won't be a silver bullet at that time. I just want to confirm that. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I do agree. Not unless if members differs, we are expecting an indication of those units with high system losses, and as well as what are we proposing to deal with them, and then that will basically trigger an engagement, and then we may come up with a solution when we discuss that. There is a hand. I don't know whose hand is it. But if it's not,
Ma'am,
Mr. Mkize, thank you. Oh yes, you are coming up on the screen again now. Yes, Mr. Mkize, I've seen.
Yeah, Chairperson, I was actually intent on talking to this issue maybe at the end of this of these applications. You know, I'm listening. Sometimes the deficit is 1%, and is seen as is seen as a problematic. Then you get one that is minus 38. It's seen as it's bad. Then you get another one that is 35, and 20 and minus 20. It's very bad. I think if the relativity can be very clear in all of this, put them in context, I take it that the team here is not interacting with this municipality just at the point of lodgement of applications for tariff adjustments. The engagement is continuous, and therefore to deal with these issues, deal with the matters of the economic backbone of those municipalities. For example, if we're to publish like if I look at the APP ASP ratios, some municipalities are actually cheaper in the sense in terms of electricity, and that can be a starting point in terms of attracting investment in that particular municipality. So that information will come in September. It's going to be useful in terms of also looking at those things. So I expect that to feature in. But when it comes to the issue of the losses, I think from my side, the starting point is, what does the law empower us to do? What is it that we can do if we find a municipality to be inefficient, or the inefficiencies cross what action can we really take in terms of the law? And now the era is being amended. What can we do quickly in this regard to empower us to deal with it? To say, for example, if we've got losses of so much, we cannot really talk of increases. First, fix these holes in your packet, as said by Mrs. Chotro. So I'm saying let's look at that quickly, because everything that we do actually starts from the point of the legal provisions. Then we can then deal with these issues on an ongoing basis, other than just zooming at them now that there's an application before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mkiza, and I think the team has noted that. So, Mr. Sichotlo, in terms of your report in September, also cover what Mr. Mkiza has raised, and as well as on the system losses, also look at what are we empowered to do. I think legal will come in and assist you when you bring those proposals. And I think, am I correct, Mr. Gumeto, Mr. Sichotlo, that report, it's going to the ELS, not to this committee, or am I wrong? If I can be guided, Mr. Mkiza. Mr. Gumeto.
Chairperson, yes, it will go to the ELS.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, because it's got some principal decisions that needs to be made by the committee. Thank you so much. So I think by show of hand, I don't recall, members, if we did a vote on the application. Thank you, Mr. Gumete, I do support, and Mr. Mkiza, thank you. And there is that concern with that applicant in terms of high system losses. We then move on to Limpopo province. We've got Blowback, Majafela.
Thank you, Chairperson. Blowback is located in Limpopo province. When we look at the information, it clearly shows that the customer profile is negatively impacting their financial sustainability, because their customer profile is mainly domestics, and they are consuming at the first two blocks where the prices are very low. When we go to their tariff, they are proposing a guideline increase of 7.47 for all the tariffs. We therefore recommend for the tariff to be approved. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, sir. Members, any issues with the application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication of your support of the recommendations that are made by the team? Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Thank you, Mr. Gumete. I do support on that note. We then move on to Ephraim Mohale. Ms. Nkopo.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ephraim Mohale is applying for the guideline increase. The financial indicators are reasonable when compared to the benchmarks, and all the tariffs have been recommended for approval as they are increasing by the guideline. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication of your support of the recommendation for this particular application? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumete, and I do support. We then move on to Greater Tzaneen. Ms. Nkopo.
Thank you, Chair. Greater Tzaneen operated at a deficit. However, the energy losses have reduced. The domestic prepaid tariff has been reduced to align to the benchmark. All the tariffs are increasing by the guideline as well. It is therefore recommended that the tariffs be approved as recommended.
Thank you. Members, if there are issues, please let me know. If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation to approve the tariff for Greater Tzaneen? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumete. I do support. We then move on to Lephalale.
Thank you, Chairperson. Lephalale is located in Limpopo province, and they are applying for a guideline increase of 4.7%. However, I like to draw the attention of the members to the energy losses. The information they submitted showed the negative energy losses. And when we engaged the municipality, they indicated that in their own view, they feel that the ESCOM had the billing errors. So we included figure 1 to show the actual what they bought from ESCOM and what they purchased. And if you look at the red bars, you will see somewhere the red bar are longer than the green one, meaning municipality sold more than what they bought for. However, in correcting that, the municipality engaged ESCOM, and the resolution from that was the municipality will install their own check meters. But from our side, we were also thinking there might be an issue of people generating back to the grid. So we therefore recommend for the tariff to be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? On page 47, thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. Mr. Mkize, thank you.
I support, but I think that there should be conclusive findings afterwards on that issue.
Yes, Mr. Mudise, you have noted that in terms of the issue that you have highlighted.
As is noted, that is why in our recommendation, we are also requesting the municipality to give us the billing, the report on the installation of the check meters. Okay. So that we can definitely say the error was because ESCOM billing, but also we are indicating to them to say, please check if there are those embedded generators.
Let's just conclude. I think guidance has been given that we must just bring back the conclusion. Let's not try and resolve it here, please. The time for members is really out already.
No, noted, and maybe in the letter give a specified date as to when you want to get the report. Can we then move on to Polokwane?
Thank you, Chairperson. Polokwane has applied for increase of the guideline. The financials, looking at the financials, the municipality operated at a surplus, but has high energy losses. All the tariffs are within the benchmarks and are also increasing by the guideline. It is therefore recommended they be approved as applied for by the municipality. Thank you, Chairperson.
Members, any issues on this application? If not, can I get an indication by show of hand that you support the tariffs applied for by the municipality? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. We then move on to Mpumalanga. Chief Albert, Ms. Mkopo.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chief Albert Lutulu has operated at a deficit of 69%. The reason for this high deficit is due to the repairs and maintenance that had increased by almost 50%, the interest paid to ESCOM, the low collection rate, and the high energy losses, as well as the accidents of the NMD. With regards to the accidents of the NMD, the municipality is engaging with ESCOM on the increase of its NMD. And also with the interest paid to ESCOM, it also has a payment plan to pay up its outstanding debt. The tariffs are increasing by the guideline, and all the tariffs have been recommended for approval as applied for by the municipality. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Ms. Mkopo. Members, are there any issues? If there are none, Mr. Mkize? You're supporting the approval?
Supporting approval, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do as well. The next one is City of Mbombela. Ms. Mkopo?
Thank you, Chair. And then City of Mbombela operated at a surplus but has high energy losses. However, the municipality has applied for increase that's within the guideline, and all the tariffs are within the guideline and the benchmarks. Thank you, Chairperson.
Members, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation, unless if there is an issue you want to raise? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. And I also support the application. We move on to Emma Kazeni.
Thank you, Chair. Emma Kazeni has operated at a deficit due to the high energy losses and the interest paid to ESCOM, but the municipality has a plan with ESCOM on the payment of its outstanding debt. All the tariffs are increasing by the guideline and have been recommended for approval as applied for by the municipality.
Thank you.
Also, sorry, Chairperson, the domestic prepaid and conventional have been reduced to align to the benchmark. Thank you, Chair.
That's noted. Members, any other issues that you may have? If not, by show of hands, can I get an indication that you support the tariff application of Emma Kazeni? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. We move on to Governor Mbeki.
Governor Mbeki, the tariffs are increasing by the guideline. In this municipality, we've seen an improvement on the financial and technical indicators. This is due to the reduced deficit and then the reduced energy losses by 18%. All the tariffs have been applied for, have been recommended as applied for by the municipality. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Members, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support unless if there is an issue you want to raise? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. Lekwa, Ms. Nkopo.
Thank you, Chair. With Lekwa, this municipality was put under administration, and due to the intervention, we've seen an improvement in its financial and technical losses. This is also evident from the reduced deficit and the interest paid to ESCOM. And then there's 3 major customers that are paying directly to ESCOM. That's improving the payment to the outstanding debt to ESCOM. And also, Chairperson, the municipality is also applying for increase that's within the guideline, and all the tariffs have been recommended for approval as applied for by the municipality.
Thank you. Members, any issues other than that? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the tariff application? I do. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. We move on to Mkondo. Ms. Kekana.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mkondo municipality is in the Mpumalanga province. It has a decreased deficit, higher APPSP, and higher energy losses. All the tariffs are in line with the guideline increase. Most tariffs are within the benchmarks. Only the commercial tariffs are below the benchmarks. I therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication of your approval of this tariff? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. Mr. Mkhize, I don't see your hand. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Then we move on to Msukwaligwa. Oh, I beg your pardon if I pronounce it wrong. Ms. Nkopo?
Thank you, Chairperson. The financial health of Msukwaligwa is not satisfactory at all. This is evident from the high deficit and the increasing energy losses. The municipality has applied for a guideline increase, but however, there's one tariff that was increased by above the guideline and has been limited to the guideline increase, and whereby tariffs are above the benchmarks have been aligned to the benchmarks. I therefore recommend approval as per the analysis. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Members, are there any issues you want to raise? If there's none, recommendations are on 163. By show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the application? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. And then we move on to Steve.
Chair, but this one definitely needs to be flagged. Chair, if you look at their ASP, very high ASP, extremely high losses, clearly we need to do something as the energy regulator on this one. Definitely needs to be flagged.
Okay, that will be done. Brian, can you please note this as well? This one as well. But we do support the application, right, Mr. Gumede?
Yes, we do. Chair.
Other than the concern on the ASP, thank you. Can we move on to Steve Chwete? Ms. Nkopo?
Thank you, Chair. With Steve Chwete, we've seen an improvement on the financials. This is evident on the increased surplus and also the reduced energy losses. All the tariffs have been applied for are increasing by the guideline and have been recommended as applied for by the municipality. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication of your approval of this particular application? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, Mr. Gumede. I do support. We then move on to the Eastern Cape Province. We start with Amahlati. Ms. Leburu.
Amahlati municipality is applying for a 7.47% increase, which is in line with the approved guideline. The performance of the electricity department of the municipality is not satisfactory, as is shown by the high energy losses and the deficit levels. However, the municipality has provided a plan in which they are committing to work on the high energy losses. The tariffs are increasing within the ranges and the guideline increase. We therefore recommend for approval. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, can I get an indication by hand that you support? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. We then move on to the next one, which is Blue Crane. It's you again, ma'am, Ms. Leburu.
Yes, ma'am. Blue Crane is also applying within the approved guideline increase. The performance of this municipality as compared to its counterpart within the same province is it's better, as is reflected by the a level of some surplus. The energy losses, however, are in the increasing side. The municipality also has got some measures in place to deal with the factors that are contributing to the high energy losses. The tariffs are all increasing, both within the ranges and the guideline increase. We therefore recommend for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any issues? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the tariff from Blue Crane? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Mr. Mkhize, thank you. We then move on to Buffalo City. Ms. Matlako.
Thank you, Chair. Buffalo City is a metro municipality in the Eastern Cape province. The municipality is operating at a deficit of 4.54%, which is a decline from the previous year's 3.76% deficit. This is primarily attributed to a 322 million in lost revenue as a result of the high energy losses, as well as a 47% increased expenditure in NMD penalties from Eskom. The energy losses have also deteriorated from 19.05% in the previous year to 22% currently. The non-technical losses component of the total losses amounts to about 276 million. And in terms of the percentage, non-technical losses is 16.96% of the total electricity losses. The increase of non-technical losses can be attributed mainly to the lack of operational budget and staff capacity within the metro. In terms of the tariffs, all tariffs are increasing by the guideline increase of 7.47%, and all tariffs are within the set benchmarks. Some are even below the benchmarks. I therefore recommend for approval, Chair, as stated in Section 7 of the analysis sheet. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application that you may have? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I also support. We then move on to King Sabata. Ms. Leburu.
King Sabata is situated in the Eastern Cape province and is applying for 7.47% increase. The municipality is showing some signs of improvement in terms of the deficit, in terms of the surplus and the energy losses. The tariffs are all increasing within the ranges and the guideline increase. I therefore recommend for approval. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Members, are there any issues on this application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the application from King Sabata? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. We then move on to the next one, which is Kuha. Ms. Leburu.
Similarly to KSD, Kuha municipality is applying for 7.47% in the Eastern Cape province. They are also showing some signs of improvement in terms of their electricity business performance. The tariff are increasing within the ranges and the guideline increase. We therefore recommend for approval. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations in this application? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. We then move on to the next one, Ogama. Ms. Matlow.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Gokama is situated in the Eastern Cape. They are applying for an increase that is within the guideline. They are operating as a surplus and the energy losses are above the benchmarks. The mainly customers of the municipality are domestic and they consume the first two blocks and their tariffs are increasing by the guideline and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any issues? Mr. Gumede?
Chairperson, I support the recommendation, but I don't understand this. We've got a municipality with 99% domestic customers on prepaid and have a 22% losses. How? I mean, that makes no sense to me.
Thank you. Mr. Mkize, I see your hand is up as well.
Chairperson, maybe I'm misunderstanding. I just want to check it because to me it says the selling price, the purchase price is higher than the selling price. They can just correct that. I think there's a typo or something.
Miss Macron, can you come in quickly on the two issues?
Yes, I will double check and correct. And another thing, the municipality is only supplying 30% of the customers, as the majority of the customers are only supplied by Eskom. Hence, there is not much revenue that is generated from the municipality.
Okay, and then you will check the one on the higher purchase price.
Yes, I will double check. And another thing, the municipality is buying on a night safe, which might be another challenge for the Minukias. And I will double check the APP and the AC.
Chair, I think it will be unfair for us to expect members at this stage to approve based on us still going to be checking. We still have another REC coming. We missed that one, and can we bring it back?
So you request that we refer this one back and then...
Yeah, we'll refer back. I think the matters raised by Mr. Gumede and Mr. Mkize, we missed them. Let's rather bring it back because we are still going to be checking. It cannot be that members must approve while we are still going to be checking.
Checking. All right. Thanks for the guidance. Members, are you okay with that particular recommendation from the head of the department? That this particular application will be sent back and it will be brought back with including the responses to the two issues raised.
Supported.
Thank you. On that note, can we move on to Mbizana? Ms. McLeod.
Thanks, Chair. Mbizana municipality is situated in the Eastern Cape. They are applying for an increase that is within the guideline. Their financial and technical performance are not satisfactory. All their tariffs are increasing by the guideline and within the benchmarks, and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this one? And if there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. And I do support. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. As well, we then move on to Ndlambe.
Ndlambe municipality is situated in the Eastern Cape. They are applying for an increase that is within the guideline. The financial and technical performance are not satisfactory, and all their tariffs are within the benchmarks and increasing by the guideline, and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any issues on this one? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the tariff application? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. We then move on to Raymond Mhlaba. Ms. Leburu.
Sorry, Chair, it's going again. I think it was a typo error. Raymond Mhlaba is situated in the Eastern Cape. They are applying for an increase that is within the guideline. Their financial and technical performance are not satisfactory. Tariffs that were above the benchmarks were limited by the CEPI, and the rest are within the guidelines and increasing by the guideline and within the benchmarks, and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues with this application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? I do. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. We then move on to Sengu. Ms. Macron.
Senqu municipality is situated in the Eastern Cape. They are applying for an increase that is within the guideline. The municipality is operating at a surplus. However, the energy losses are above the benchmarks, and then all the tariffs are above the benchmarks, and those that were above were limited, and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication of your approval of the recommendations? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. And thank you, Mr. Mkize. We then move on to Sunday's River. Ms. Mokso again.
Sunday's River is situated in the Eastern Cape. They are applying for an increase that is within the guideline. The financial and technical performance are not satisfactory, and tariffs are within the benchmarks and increasing by the guideline, and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this particular application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. And I do support. We then move on to Umsobomvu.
Umsobomvu is situated in the Northern Cape. They are applying for an increase that is within the guideline. The financial and technical performance are not satisfactory. Tariffs that are above the benchmarks were limited, and the rest are within the benchmarks, and we therefore recommend for approval.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this one? And if there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you approve the application? Thank you, Mr. Gumede and Mr. Mkize. I do support. We move on to the Northern Cape province. We go to David Kraper, Nkangweleni.
Okay, thank you. David Kraper is applying for 7.47. The municipality is doing well, looking at their financial indicators. And then all tariffs are within the benchmarks, except for the two tariffs for commercial conventional, 45 kVA and 70 kVA, and they are limited to the inflation of 4.4% increase. So I recommend for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. And I do. We then move on to Mtanjeni. Ms. Masike.
Thank you, Chair. Mtanjeni is based in the Northern Cape. The municipality's performance is not satisfactory, as indicated by the deficit of 7.68 and high energy losses, which are above the benchmark. The municipality is generally applying for 7.7. They've indicated that the 7.48 indicated in the increase for domestic customers is merely due to rounding off, so all those tariffs will be limited to 7.47. The energy losses have decreased from 15.29 to 14.54, and they've provided the split in terms of technical and non-technical. The technical losses amount to about 11.63, while the non-technical losses amount to just over 2%. The municipality is committed to submitting a project plan and the timelines and budget on how to reduce the losses by 30 September 2022. Chairperson, we recommended that the increases be approved for 7.47 as applied for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation from made on this particular applicant? Thank you, Mr. Mkize, Mr. Gumede. I do support. We then move on to Hamahara. Aleta or Ms. Tanda.
Thank you, Chairperson. Hamahara, Northern Cape. All tariff proposed is 7.47, and all the tariffs are within the benchmark except for a commercial conventional below 100 amp three-phase, which is limited to 6.45% to be in line with the benchmark. The electricity department performance is satisfactory as evident with the supplies, although the energy loss are still the cause of a concern. NERSA will closely monitor the energy losses. The tariff has been recommended as proposed.
Thank you. Members, any issues? And if there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations of this made on this application? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, Mr. Gumede. I do support. We then move on to Khasi Honyane. Nkangweleni.
Okay, Hasukwanyana is also applying for an average increase of 7.47, and all tariffs are within the benchmark, so I recommend for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues? If there are none, can I get an indication by show of hand that you support the application? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I thank you, Mr. Gumede, and I do support. We then move on to the next application, which is Hantam. Ms. Botha.
Thank you, Chairperson. Hantam also forms part of the Northern Cape province. Their financial performance is stable, as indicated by a surplus level of 15.86%. Their energy losses are slightly higher than the ranges at 12.34%, but they have significantly improved as compared to the previous period at 17%. The municipality is applying for an overall guideline increase. All block tariffs are increasing by the guideline and within the benchmarks, and some even below. Therefore, we recommend for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? And if none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations made? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. And then we move on to the next one, which is Guy Harip Uiswa.
Thank you, Chairperson. Guy Harip is also situated in the Northern Cape, and they are applying for a 7.25 average tariff price, which is below the guideline. The municipality's electricity business is operating at a deficit, and it has high energy losses. Most tariffs are above the benchmarks, but they are increasing by 7.25%. We therefore request for approval, Chairperson, as per recommendations on paragraph 9 on page 390 of the submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations? Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. We move on to the next one, which is Kgatelopele. Delisile.
Kgatelopele is in Northern Cape. The municipality is proposing an average tariff of 7.47%. All commercial tariffs have been increased by CPI, which is 4.4%, to align the tariff to NERSA average benchmark. The tariff has been recommended as proposed.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I do support. We then move on to Maharena. Again, it's you, Delisile.
Mahareng, situated in Northern Cape, they are proposing an average tariff of 7.47. All the tariffs are within the benchmark, except for the municipality department. It's increasing to be in line with their commercial prepaid tariff. The tariff has been recommended as proposed.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support?
I hope they just corrected this typo. That is 3,000 and something. Okay, that's fine. But we can just correct the typo there.
Okay.
Supported.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Please colleagues check if it's a typo or not. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. And I also do support. Then we move on to the next one, which is Namakoi. Ms. Mkhize.
Thank you, Chair. Namakoi is a municipality that is situated in the Northern Cape, and Namakoi is applying with
You got cut off. Ms. Mkhize. back to her. Can we move on? Are you?
Can you hear me?
Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that, Chair. As I was saying that the municipality gave a deficit of 3.47. However, it's because of the energy losses are high, and then and then even okay, in the markup on the tariff is quite low. Even though some of the tariffs are above the benchmark, we recommend for the approval of this tariff as their markup is low. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any issues on this application? If there's none, by show of hands, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation? Mr. Mkiza, please mute yourself. Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. We then move on to Pokwane. Mr. Kwadi?
Okay, thank you. Pokwane is applying for an average increase of 7.47. The municipality buys electricity on a night safe rural tariff, which is expensive from ESCOM. And then coming to the tariffs, some of the tariffs, I think commercial and industrial are above the benchmark. So I recommend that this tariff be approved as applied for, as the municipality is buying at a very the expensive tariff from ESCOM. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any issues, members? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you approve the tariff, the recommendation on this application as presented? Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support Mr. Mkiza. Thank you for supporting as well. And then we move on to Tembelihle. Ms. Tanda.
Thank you, Chair. Tembelihle, situated in Northern Cape, proposing an average tariff of 7.47%. All tariffs are within the benchmark. The commercial three-phase tariff is increasing by a CPI to align the tariff to NERSA average benchmark. The tariff has been recommended as proposed.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? And if there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the application? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support. We move on to Tanzabane and Zwanga Ralufe.
Thank you again, Chairperson. Tanzabane is also located in Northern Cape. The percentage surplus is reflecting very well. And then the energy losses, however, they are at 21.6%, which is outside the NERSA benchmarks. There have been adjustments to 3 sets of tariffs. However, they've been limited to what NERSA has prescribed. But overall, all the tariffs are at 7.47%. As the guideline has indicated, it is recommended that this tariff be approved. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, sir. Members, any issues with this application? If there's none, by show of hands, can I?
Chairperson, I don't understand what is under 6.6, the industrial park.
Under 6.6, page 453, Mr. Ralube.
That minus 15 there. What's the?
Yeah, it's on the average price, which was higher than the benchmark. So I limited it to the benchmark to avoid the municipality charging outside what NERSA has prescribed.
Okay, are you okay with that, Mr. Mkize? Thank you.
Sorry, I don't understand it because the proposed is 7.47, right? The increase here, it says, is a decrease of minus 15.38.
Yes,
but they are saying that, yeah, let me listen.
Okay, the two between 21 and 22, the 22 which was approved, and what they're proposing, the average tariff got to 3.49%, However, the benchmark in this category is 2.62 to 2.75, and we couldn't give 3.49, which is outside the benchmark, then got limited to 2.75.
So explain then the minus 15.38. I think that's what Mr. Mkiza wanted to link it to the other blocks that you have just mentioned.
It's a variance between what was approved in the average price in 21-22 and what what the benchmark is recommend, what the benchmark is of 2.75.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks, Mr. Mkiza. Are you covered?
I'm also clear here whether if it is outside of benchmark, shouldn't you give it you keep it as is instead of reducing it? So what has been happening that where we want to keep it within benchmark, we then would use CPI. If just for those that are outside benchmark, now you are coming up with a total decrease, which is not something that we've adhered on as a matter of principle.
Okay, I take it. I'm gonna increase it at a CPI.
Ralufe, is it not safer for you? Say, I know, I know that these things were done in a hurry. Is it not safer for you, Ralufe, to rather ask the members for their indulgence and then you bring it back? I know this was done in a much hurry because you are just now accepting, but you have not applied your mind. I'd rather maybe, Chairperson, that at the same as the one that we withdrew from Kwena, we do the same.
Okay, I do support that. Members, there's a suggestion that this application, we take it back so that the analyst can just relook at the 6.6 and bring it back to us with the next batch of tariff application. Members, do we agree on that? Thank you. And thanks. Then we move on to Ubuntu. Ms. Makaku.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. Ubuntu is operating at a deficit of 28% for the current financial year. This is a further deterioration from a 15% in the previous year. In terms of the total revenue, it reduced by 3%, while total expenditure of the municipality increased by 9%. The high deficit on the electricity account is a result from the high energy losses as well as escalating penalties on Eskom's bulk account. The municipality further lost 6.7 million in revenues as a result of high energy losses. In terms of the tariffs, the municipality has applied for a 7.47% increase, and all the tariffs are in line with that guideline increase, and they are all within the benchmarks. I therefore recommend for approval, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Matlako. Members, any issues on this application? If there are none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the application? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Then we move on to Abakulusi.
Thank you, Chairperson. Abakulusi municipality is applying for average price increase of 7.47. In terms of the financial and technical indicators, they are not satisfactory, Chairperson. In terms of the tariff, some of the tariff are within the benchmarks, while others are above. Those that are above were limited, Chairperson. Recommendation is on page 476. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application from Abakulusi? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations made? Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I do support. Mr. Mkiza, I don't see your hand. Thank you, Mr. Mkiza. We move on to eThekwini. Hlumani.
Thank you, Chair.
Tekwini, this municipality from KZN is applying for an average increase of 7.47, and all tariff increases are within guideline. So it is recommended that we approve. It is approved as applied for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, members. Any issues on this particular application? By show of hand. If there's none, can I get an indication again by show of hands that you support the recommendations made on eThekwini? Thank you, Mr. Gumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize, and I do support. We then move on to KwaDukuza. Again, it's you and Mr. Mandla.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the KwaDukuza municipality is also applying for an overall average of 7.47%. Most of the tariffs are either in line with guideline or below guideline. However, there's that tariff that is similar to Drakenstein, which is based on an agreement between SAPI and the municipality, and only SAPI is affected by that high increase of 8.61, which is in line with the bulk increase to municipalities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, members. Any issues? I see Mr. Mkhize's hand is up and Brian as well. Mr. Mkhize? Or is it a lingering hand?
Yeah, I'm not so sure how we deal with the one for SAPI, which is the 8.61, whether we follow the route of having it approving the rest and then having that other ELS.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I'm sorry to come in like that because I was actually raising my hand on the very same point. In the same vein that we did, I think it was the one that was presented by Kwena. We said let us approve the rest, and then this one being an SPA or NPA, can we then take it to the ELS? This particular one of the SAPI one. I'd rather we do it that way. The rest can then be considered by this committee, Chairperson, for consistency again.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sichoto. Members, yes, for consistency, as we have done with the other one, which was it Kokam? May I request that we approve all the other tariff categories with the exception of the SAPI one, which will be referred to the ELS. By show of hand, members, can I get an indication that you support that? Thank you, Mr. Gumete. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I do support that. Thank you. We then move on to Mbofana.
Thank you, Chairperson. I just want to highlight that Mbofana is under administration. The Munich is applying for average price increase of 7.47. The financial and technical indicators are not satisfactory, as highlighted by the deficit and also the energy losses. Issues here, Chairperson, is low collection rate, interest incurred on the outstanding debt to Eskom. Chairperson, upon engagement with this Munich, the Munich stated that they are struggling to pay the bulk payments. Chairperson, on page 508, there's a typo on the bulk tariff. The tariff there, the high season should be the same as the recommendation should be the same as proposed. Recommendation is on page 509. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any issues on this application? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendation with that particular correction that the presenter said it needs to be made? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you, Mr. Kumete. I also do support. Can we then go on to Ngutu?
Thank you, Chairperson. Ngutu municipality is applying for average price increase of 7.47. In terms of the financial and technical indicators, the Munich performance is not satisfactory. The tariffs, Chairperson, are within the benchmarks. However, the electricity business is improving, as you've seen with the improving energy losses and the deficit. The recommendation is on page 522. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this one? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that the recommendations are approved in terms of in relation to this particular application. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I also do support. We then move on to Ulundi.
Thank you, Chairperson. Ulundi municipality is applying for average price of 7.47 on the normal tariff. In terms of the financial and technical indicators, the electricity business is not performing very well. Issues here also is collection rate, energy loss, NMD, and interest owed to ESCOM. Chairperson, we have similar tariff that Mr. Manza said, that there's one tariff that is increasing above, which is a contract between ESCOM and the municipality, which is a wheeling. I would really appreciate if this only tariff can be taken to ELS and the rest be approved. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members, any objection to that? In terms of the proposal, thank you, Mr. Mkize. I do support the tariff that needs to go to ELS, and as well as members are approving the recommendations of all other tariffs. Thank you, Mr. Gumede, Mr. Mkize, and as I said, I do support. We then move on to Umgeni.
Thank you, Chairperson. Umgeni municipalities are applying for average price of 7.47%. In terms of the financial and technical indicators, the electricity business performance is not satisfactory. Issues here, Chairperson, also, this unit is buying electricity on night save, as they stated before, that is expensive as compared to the Mega Flex. The tariff are within the benchmark. Recommendation, Chairperson, is on page 549. Thank you.
Thank you, members. Any issues on this one? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations made? Thank you, Mr. Mkize, Mr. Gumede, and I do support. Then we move on to Umuzi Wabantu. Ms. Matlaku.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. Umuzi Wabantu, there are no issues in terms of the financial and technical indicators. There's actually an improvement in the percentage surplus levels from the previous year's level of 3%. It is now sitting at 7.16%. In terms of the tariffs, the municipality has applied for an average increase of 7.47, but we do see other tariff categories that are increasing below the guideline. All the tariffs are within the benchmark, and I recommend the tariffs as proposed by the municipality for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Members, any issues with this application that you may have? If there's none, by show of hand, can I get an indication that you support the recommendations made on this particular application? Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support. Then we move on to our last tariff application, which is Umkanyagude. Ms. Mapita.
Thank you, Chairperson. The Umkanyagude is a district. This Munich is applying for 7.47. Just want to highlight, Chairperson, that this Munich is buying electricity on night save, rural, which is expensive as compared to the Megaflex, and most of the tariff here, they are below our ranges. Chairperson, issues here is the night save and also the high energy losses. Recommendation is on page 569. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any issues on this application? I'm sorry. Yes, thank you, Mr. Gumede. I do support as well. I've noted that you support Mr. Mkize. I don't see Mr. Mkize's hand. So, thank you, Mr. Mkize. The application is supported. Thank you, members. We have now come to the end of our open session of our meeting. May I request IT, or let me thank stakeholders that have joined us in this meeting, and thank you for their attention.